I inherited a $5 million farmhouse from my late father. My greedy husband and mother-in-law stormed into the farmhouse and presented fake documents claiming ownership of the property. When I refused to accept the documents, they tied me to a tree with rope and burned my father's farmhouse. I was crying while they laughed and left me there alone. But after 2 hours, I gave them a horrific surprise they never expected. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how betrayal almost broke me but ultimately made me stronger. It all began the day my father passed away. He was my rock, my guide, and my source of unconditional love. Losing him left a gaping hole in my heart. But even in death, he left me a precious gift, the farmhouse. The farmhouse wasn't just any property. It was a $5 million estate nestled in the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and trees that whispered secrets from generations past. My father used to say it was more than a home. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked hard for. He often reminded me, "This place is yours, Sarah. When I'm gone, make it your sanctuary." After his death, I decided to move into the farmhouse, hoping it would help me feel closer to him.
It did.
I spent my days walking through the fields, touching the walls of the home he built with his own hands, and reliving the memories of us sitting on the porch, talking about life. It was peaceful, until that evening when my life changed forever. I still remember the knock on the door. When I opened it, there stood my husband, Daniel, and his mother, Martha. They hadn't visited me at the farmhouse before, which immediately felt odd. Daniel, my husband of 5 years, had always been distant. He worked as a corporate manager in the city, constantly buried in his job. And Martha, well, she was a retired school teacher who never hid her disdain for me. She often reminded me that Daniel had married beneath himself. Over time, I learned to tune her out. But that evening, something was different. Their expressions were cold, their energy unsettling. "Sarah," Daniel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" I asked, watching Martha follow him with a smirk that made my stomach churn. Daniel pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the kitchen table. "These are legal documents. Your father signed this property over to me and Mom before he died." I blinked, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about? That's not possible. My father would never." "He did," Martha interrupted, her voice sharp. "He wanted us to have this place. He knew you couldn't handle it alone." I felt my chest tighten as I picked up the papers. They looked official, with seals and signatures. But I knew my father better than anyone. He wouldn't have given away something so meaningful without telling me. "This is fake," I said firmly, pushing the papers back toward them. "I'm not signing anything. This property is mine." Daniel's jaw clenched, and his tone turned icy. "You don't know what you're talking about. These documents are legally binding." I stood my ground. "Then prove it in court. Until then, get out of my house." Martha's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "You ungrateful little," she began, but Daniel stopped her. "Fine," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But you'll regret this." As they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I felt a pang of fear creep into my chest. Something about the way Daniel looked at me, cold and calculating, made me uneasy. But I pushed it aside. I thought their threats were empty words. I was wrong. A few days later, I returned home from a walk in the woods to find Daniel and Martha waiting for me in the driveway. This time, their anger was palpable. "We gave you a chance, Sarah," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Now you're forcing us to take matters into our own hands." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Before I could react, Martha grabbed my arm while Daniel pulled out a rope. Panic surged through me as they dragged me toward the large oak tree near the edge of the property. I screamed, but there was no one around to hear me. "You brought this on yourself," Martha sneered as they tied me tightly to the tree. "What are you doing?" I cried, my voice trembling. "Let me go." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he lit a match. My eyes widened in horror as I realized his intention. "No," I screamed, struggling against the ropes. "Stop, please." The farmhouse, my sanctuary, went up in flames. I could only watch as the fire consumed everything my father had built. The smell of smoke and the crackling of wood filled the air, but the pain in my chest was worse. This wasn't just a home, it was the last connection I had to my father. And they were destroying it. When the fire raged high enough to light up the night sky, Daniel and Martha walked away, leaving me tied to the tree. "Enjoy the show," Martha said with a cruel laugh before disappearing into the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was the end. But then something inside me shifted. Fear turned into resolve. Betrayal burned in my veins like fuel, igniting a fire of my own. I wasn't going to let them win. The moment Daniel and Martha disappeared into the darkness, leaving me bound to that tree, I knew I had two choices: surrender to despair or fight for my life. The flames from the burning farmhouse roared in front of me, licking the night sky. The smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe. The farmhouse wasn't just a building, it was everything my father had worked for. Watching it collapse was like losing him all over again. But I couldn't let it end like this. Not tied to a tree, defeated. My hands were bound tightly, the rope biting into my wrists. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the pain, determined to free myself. The firelight flickered across the property, casting eerie shadows. I focused on a jagged piece of bark sticking out of the tree. Gritting my teeth, I rubbed the rope against it, over and over, until my arms felt like lead. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, the rope began to fray. With one final pull, it snapped and I was free. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I didn't care. I stumbled forward, coughing and gasping for air. The fire was relentless, but I couldn't stop staring at it. My father's legacy was gone, reduced to ash by the people who were supposed to be my family. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry, furious. I clenched my fists, vowing that I wouldn't let Daniel and Martha get away with this. They thought they'd won, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The first thing I did was call the police. It felt surreal describing what had happened. My husband and his mother tied me to a tree and burned my house down. I told the officer on the phone. The disbelief in his voice was palpable, but I didn't care. "Send someone," I insisted. "I can prove everything." While I waited for the authorities, I began surveying the damage. The farmhouse was completely destroyed, nothing but blackened rubble. The heat from the fire still radiated, and the smell of smoke clung to the air. But then I spotted something that gave me hope. Near the edge of the property, the security camera I'd installed months ago still stood. Its casing was melted, but the memory card inside looked intact. When the police arrived, I handed over the memory card. "This might have footage of them," I explained. The officers took it, promising to investigate. But I could tell they weren't convinced. Their skepticism was like a slap in the face, but I refused to let it deter me. After they left, I sat in my car trying to figure out my next move. My father had always told me, when life knocks you down, get back up stronger. His words echoed in my mind, giving me the strength I needed to keep going. If the police weren't going to take this seriously, I would build a case on my own. The first step was to prove that the documents Daniel and Martha used were fake. I went to a lawyer my father had trusted, Mr. Callahan. He was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Sarah," he said after I explained everything, "this is serious. If those documents are fraudulent, we can prove it. But it'll take time." "I don't care how long it takes," I replied. "I need justice for my father." Mr. Callahan nodded. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we dug into the documents Daniel had presented. It didn't take long to find glaring inconsistencies. The signatures didn't match my father's, and the dates were suspiciously close to his death. It was clear to me that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this scheme, hoping I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't stopping there. I started talking to neighbors and local workers who might have seen or heard something that night. To my relief, a few people remembered seeing Daniel and Martha's car parked near the property. One neighbor even mentioned hearing loud voices and a woman scream. Their testimonies added more weight to my case. Meanwhile, I retrieved the security footage from the memory card. Watching it made my stomach churn. There they were, Daniel and Martha, dragging me to the tree, and setting the farmhouse on fire. Seeing their faces twisted with malice was like reliving the nightmare all over again. But instead of breaking me, it fueled my determination. Every step of the way, I felt my resolve hardening. Daniel and Martha had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, someone they could intimidate and silence. But they didn't realize that their betrayal had awakened a part of me I didn't know existed, a part that refused to back down. I began piecing everything together, the fake documents, the security footage, the witness testimonies. It was like assembling a puzzle, and with each new piece, I felt more confident. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring my father's memory and making sure his legacy wasn't tarnished by greed and deceit. But even as I prepared for the battle ahead, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. What if the court didn't believe me? What if Daniel and Martha found a way to manipulate the system? I pushed those thoughts aside. You're stronger than this, I told myself. You've already survived the worst. Now it's time to fight back. The day after I compiled all my evidence, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but I could hear the venom beneath it. Sarah, he said, let's put this behind us. If you drop everything, we'll leave you alone. No harm done. I gripped the phone tightly, my anger bubbling to the surface. You set my house on fire, Daniel. You tried to destroy everything my father left me. Do you really think I'd let you walk away? He chuckled. Suit yourself. Just remember, you started this. I hung up, my hands shaking. His threat was clear, but it didn't scare me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to stop until Daniel and Martha paid for what they'd done. After Daniel's threatening phone call, I knew there was no turning back. The fear that once lingered in the pit of my stomach had transformed into determination. This was about more than the farmhouse. It was about standing up to the betrayal that had been thrust upon me and reclaiming the dignity my father had instilled in me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked closely with Mr. Callahan, my lawyer, who became my unwavering ally in the fight. Together, we refined the evidence I had gathered, ensuring every piece was as solid as a brick wall. The fake documents were the centerpiece of the case, and Mr. Callahan had them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The results confirmed what I already knew. The signatures were forged, and the dates were manipulated. This alone could convict them of fraud, Mr. Callahan told me one afternoon as we sat in his cluttered office. But with everything else you've gathered, Sarah, they don't stand a chance. I nodded, clutching my cup of coffee tightly. They need to pay for what they did, not just for me, but for my father. He gave me a reassuring look. We'll make sure of that. The security footage was another crucial piece of evidence. Watching it was excruciating, but I knew it was necessary. It captured everything. The way Daniel and Martha tied me to the tree, the fire they started, and the cold, calculated expressions on their faces. Seeing it reminded me of the terror I felt that night, but it also reignited my anger. I handed the footage over to the police, who began their investigation in earnest. As the case gained traction, I started to feel a glimmer of hope. Witnesses from the neighborhood came forward to corroborate my story, strengthening the narrative that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this vile act. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recalled seeing smoke and the silhouette of two people leaving the property. Another neighbor remembered hearing voices arguing earlier in the evening. Their testimonies were the threads that tied the whole story together. But even as I built my case, I faced moments of doubt. Daniel and Martha were cunning, and I couldn't shake the fear that they might find a way to manipulate the system. My nights were restless, haunted by visions of the fire and the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. Every morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, reminding myself that this wasn't just for me, it was for my father's memory. The court date finally arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions, anxiety, anger, and a fierce determination to see this through. Daniel and Martha sat on the other side of the room, their faces impassive. Daniel looked calm, almost smug, while Martha occasionally whispered to him. Their confidence only fueled my resolve. The prosecutor began laying out the evidence piece by piece. The forged documents were presented first, and the forensic expert testified to their authenticity, or lack thereof. His detailed explanation left no room for doubt. The signatures weren't my father's, and the dates were fabricated to give the illusion of legitimacy. Next came the security footage. As the video played on the screen, the courtroom fell silent. I couldn't bring myself to watch the screen, but I could feel the weight of the evidence pressing down on everyone in the room. When the video ended, the prosecutor turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is irrefutable proof of the defendant's actions that night. Their intentions were clear, their methods cruel. Witnesses followed, one after another, each recounting what they saw or heard that night. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to the arson and left little room for Daniel and Martha to argue their innocence. As the trial progressed, I began to feel a shift in the air. The smugness on Daniel's face started to fade, replaced by a flicker of unease. Martha's whispers grew more frantic, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. But the turning point came during cross-examination. The prosecutor questioned Daniel about his presence at the farmhouse that night. His responses were evasive, his usual charm failing him. When pressed further, he stumbled over his words, contradicting his earlier statements. "Mr. Daniel," the prosecutor said sharply, "isn't it true that you and your mother went to the farmhouse with the intent to claim it as your own, despite knowing the property rightfully belonged to Sarah?" Daniel hesitated, his confidence wavering. I don't recall." The prosecutor pounced. "You don't recall tying your wife to a tree? You don't recall setting fire to the house? Or do you not recall because you've been caught?" Martha, sitting beside him, muttered something under her breath, but the damage was done. The jury's eyes were fixed on Daniel, their expressions unyielding. When it was finally my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand. My hands trembled slightly, but I spoke with as much clarity as I could muster. I told the court about my father, the farmhouse, and the betrayal that had shattered my life. "They didn't just burn down a building," I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. "They destroyed the memories, the legacy my father worked so hard to create." But I refused to let their greed and cruelty define my story. This isn't just about property, it's about justice. As I finished, the room was silent. The jury looked at me with a mixture of empathy and respect, and I felt a small flicker of hope. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I believed I might win. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be within reach. I had done everything I could to present the truth, and now it was up to the jury to decide. The courtroom was tense as the closing arguments began. The prosecutor stood with confidence, addressing the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed and cruelty," he said. "It's about two individuals who betrayed someone they should have protected. Daniel and Martha didn't just forge documents and commit arson, they tried to destroy Sarah's spirit. But Sarah fought back, and the evidence proves that she is telling the truth. These defendants must be held accountable for their actions." The defense attorney's closing argument, on the other hand, was weak and desperate. He tried to discredit the security footage, calling it circumstantial, and claimed the witnesses were unreliable. But the jury's expressions told me they weren't buying it. The evidence was too damning, and the lies too obvious. After the closing arguments, the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. Those hours felt like an eternity. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly, as Daniel and Martha whispered to each other. Martha's smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. Daniel kept glancing at me, but I refused to meet his gaze. Finally, the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of fraud, the foreperson began, "We find the defendants, Daniel Roberts and Martha Roberts, guilty." My heart raced as the foreperson continued. "On the charge of arson, we find the defendants guilty. And on the charge of attempted harm, we find the defendants guilty." The words washed over me like a wave, leaving me breathless. Guilty. They were guilty on every count. I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I held them back. This wasn't the time for tears. This was the moment I had fought so hard for. The judge sentenced Daniel and Martha to lengthy prison terms, ensuring they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a very long time. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Daniel looked back at me. His face was a mixture of anger and defeat. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Once they were gone, the weight on my chest began to lift. For the first time since that terrible night, I could breathe freely. The farmhouse might have been reduced to ashes, but my father's legacy wasn't gone. It lived on in my determination, in my fight for justice, and in the strength I had found within myself. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild, not just the farmhouse, but my life. With the insurance settlement and my inheritance intact, I began planning the restoration of the property. It wasn't just about rebuilding walls and roofs. It was about honoring my father and everything he stood for. The local community rallied around me, offering their support and encouragement. Neighbors who had testified during the trial became friends, and I realized that I wasn't alone. The farmhouse might have been isolated, but I wasn't. One day, as I stood on the property watching the workers lay the foundation for the new house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. My father's words echoed in my mind, "When life knocks you down, get back up stronger." I had done just that. Looking back, I realized that Daniel and Martha's betrayal didn't destroy me. It transformed me. I found a strength I didn't know I had, and I learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about reclaiming what's yours and standing tall in the face of adversity. The farmhouse will never be the same, but it doesn't have to be. It will be a new home, a new chapter. And I will continue to honor my father's memory by living a life he would be proud of, one built on resilience, dignity, and truth. As I tell this story now, I hope it serves as a reminder to anyone facing betrayal and loss. You are stronger than you think. And even when everything seems lost, you can rise from the ashes. The crisp autumn air still hangs heavy in my memory of the day my father, Robert Davis, passed away. It was a sudden heart attack during his usual golf game, the shock of it leaving our family reeling. I'm Clara Davis, 45 years old, a marketing manager by profession, married with 2 children. My life, once orderly, now felt like a chaotic whirlwind. Dad had been a successful real estate developer in Austin, Texas. His success afforded him a lavish lifestyle and, naturally, a significant estate. The day after the funeral, our home was filled with people offering condolences. My mother, Margaret, was especially overwhelmed. She had been Dad's rock, his partner in everything. It was up to me to step in and help her navigate through this difficult time. My half-sister, Lisa, had never been someone I got along with well. Lisa, in her late 40s, had always been a source of trouble for our family. Her reckless behavior and constant need for financial assistance had strained our parents' patience over the years. Despite being older than me, Lisa had never settled into a stable career or life. Her latest venture, marrying Ryan Parker, a younger man known for his laziness and opportunistic nature, seemed to be just another chapter in her cycle of poor decisions. The day after the funeral, Lisa and Ryan barged into the living room with an air of confidence. Lisa had this sly smile on her face, the kind that suggested she was about to make a grand announcement. Ryan, lounging casually beside her, looked more interested in the television than in the proceedings. "Clara, Mom," Lisa said, her voice dripping with faux cheerfulness, "Ryan and I were just discussing how Dad's estate should be divided. We think, given that I'm the oldest, it would be only fair if I received everything. After all, we could use the money." I stared at her, my mind racing. "You mean the entire $6 million and the stocks?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Exactly," Ryan chimed in, grinning broadly. "With all the investments Dad had, that should be more than enough to set us up for life." Mom, who had been silent, looked at Lisa with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "Is this really what you think, Lisa? We don't even know what's in the will yet." "Oh, come on, Lisa," Lisa said dismissively. "We've been through this before. Dad always favored me. It's only logical that he'd leave everything to me. Besides, Ryan and I need this. We have plans, you know. Before I could respond, the lawyer handling Dad's estate arrived, carrying a stack of documents. The atmosphere in the room shifted from casual to tense. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was a stern man in his mid-50s, known for his no-nonsense approach. He cleared his throat and began, "Thank you all for gathering. I'm here to read Mr. Davis's will." He pulled out a document and began to read aloud, his voice steady and formal. "To my daughter, Clara Davis, I leave the sum of $6 million and all associated stocks. To my wife, Margaret Davis, I leave the remainder of the estate, including the family home and other assets. Lisa Davis, my eldest child, is not mentioned in the will." Lisa's face fell as the lawyer continued reading. "Not mentioned? What does that mean?" she asked, her voice rising in agitation. Mr. Thompson looked up from his papers. "Lisa Davis is not Mr. Davis's biological child. There was no legal adoption either." The room fell silent. I glanced at Lisa, who looked as though she'd been slapped. Her husband, Ryan, shifted uncomfortably beside her, his face growing red with anger. Lisa's mouth moved, but no words came out. She was stunned, unable to process the shocking revelation. "What do you mean, not his biological child?" Lisa demanded, her voice trembling. "Dad always said I was his daughter. This can't be right." Mr. Thompson maintained his composure. Mr. Davis had intended to adopt Lisa, however, due to her continual irresponsible behavior and her disregard for her younger half-brother, he chose not to proceed with the adoption. Therefore, she is not entitled to any part of the inheritance. Lisa's face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. "So all of this," she gestured around the room, "is just going to Clara and Mom?" "Yes," Mr. Thompson confirmed. "The inheritance, as stipulated in the will, is legally given to Clara and Margaret." Ryan's face darkened as he glared at me. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You and your mother don't deserve this money. Lisa and I have been struggling, and now we're left with nothing." Mom's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Lisa. "I didn't know about this," she said softly. "We should have talked about this long ago." Lisa, realizing the gravity of her situation, turned to me with a look of pure desperation. "Clara, you have to help us. We need this money. We were counting on it." I shook my head, my mind reeling from the shock. "Lisa, you knew the risks. Dad had always been clear about his expectations. You've made choices that led us to this point." Lisa's frustration boiled over, and she stormed out of the room, followed by Ryan, who glared at me one last time before leaving. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew that this was only the beginning of the fallout from Dad's will. The days following the reading of Dad's will were filled with tension and uncertainty. Lisa and Ryan's reactions to the inheritance news had been anything but pleasant. Despite their attempts to mask it, their frustration and desperation were evident. It wasn't long before their true intentions started to surface. Mom and I were trying to keep things together, but the atmosphere at home was fraught with stress. I found myself spending more time at work to escape the chaos, and even then, my thoughts constantly drifted back to the unfolding drama with Lisa and Ryan. One chilly morning, I was at the office when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. "Lisa and Ryan are here. They want to talk." I sighed, knowing this was not going to be a friendly visit. I made my way to the family home, bracing myself for another confrontation. When I arrived, Lisa and Ryan were already there, seated in the living room with an air of defiance. Mom was standing nearby, looking weary. "Clara, thanks for coming," Lisa said, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "We need to discuss what's going to happen next." I took a deep breath. "Lisa, I don't see what else there is to discuss. The will is clear. Dad's decision was final." Lisa's eyes flashed with frustration. "It's not fair. Dad knew we were counting on that money. Ryan and I have plans, and now you and Mom are just going to take it all." Ryan leaned forward, his expression dark and calculating. "We're not giving up on this. There must be a way to challenge the will." A pang of concern shot through me. "Challenging the will? How do you plan to do that?" Ryan smirked. There are legal avenues we can explore. We're going to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and argue that Dad's decision was made under pressure or without full consideration of his family. Lisa nodded vigorously. Yes, we'll fight this. We won't let you two walk away with everything. Mom looked horrified. You're talking about a legal battle? This could get very messy. Ryan shrugged. We're prepared to do whatever it takes. We've already started consulting with a lawyer. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Lisa and Ryan's actions were driven by desperation. I was starting to see just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere became increasingly charged. Lisa and Ryan's attempts to challenge the will turned our lives upside down. They filed a formal contestation, claiming that Dad's decision had been influenced by his health and that he had been unfair in his distribution of assets. Their accusations were baseless, but their persistence was relentless. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed Ryan's car parked outside. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The man had already shown his aggressive side, and I had no idea what he might do next. I decided to confront him. Ryan, I said, approaching him with a steely gaze. What exactly do you think you're going to achieve by all this? He looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. We're doing what we have to do. We're not going to let you and Mom take everything. Lisa needs this money, we both do. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. You know, Ryan, there's a difference between fighting for what's fair and outright greed. This is beyond what's reasonable. Ryan's eyes hardened. You don't understand. This isn't just about money for us. It's about our future. If we lose this, we lose everything. Before I could respond, Lisa arrived, her face set in a determined expression. Clara, we're not giving up. If you're not going to help us, then we'll find another way. I knew that their actions were driven by more than just financial need. They had made a lifestyle out of dependence and manipulation, and now their plans were unraveling. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was overshadowed by the realization of just how destructive their greed had become. The situation escalated when Lisa and Ryan's lawyer, a man named Mr. Caldwell, started making public accusations about Dad's will. The media picked up on the story, and soon our family was under the scrutiny of reporters and gossip columns. The invasion of our private lives added another layer of stress to an already difficult situation. One day, as I was walking to the hospital to visit Mom, I saw Ryan's car again. This time, it was parked ominously near the hospital entrance. I felt a growing sense of unease. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom, warning me that Lisa and Ryan had been causing a scene in the hospital lobby. I rushed inside, my heart pounding as I approached the lobby. I saw Lisa standing by the reception desk, shouting at anyone who came close. Ryan was beside her, trying to calm her down, but looking just as agitated. Clara, Lisa called out as she spotted me. You need to get your mother to change her mind. She's the only one who can fix this. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Lisa, this isn't the place for this. We need to handle this matter through the proper legal channels. Lisa's eyes were wild with frustration. I'm done playing by the rules. We're fighting for what's ours. As tensions reached a boiling point, it was clear that Lisa and Ryan were no longer thinking rationally. Their desperation was driving them to extreme measures, and I couldn't help but worry about how far they would go to get what they believed they deserved. The weeks dragged on, filled with endless legal battles and mounting stress. Lisa and Ryan's relentless pursuit of the inheritance was causing chaos not just for Mom and me, but for everyone who crossed their path. Their aggressive tactics were taking a toll on our family, and their desperation was starting to become more alarming. One Friday evening, after a particularly grueling week, I decided to stop by the house to check on Mom. I arrived to find her sitting in the living room, looking tired and frazzled. The constant strain was evident on her face. Mom, how are you holding up? I asked, taking a seat beside her. She sighed heavily. It's been overwhelming, Clara. Lisa and Ryan won't stop. They've even started spreading rumors about our family. I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. I know. They're making this whole situation worse. They've been spreading lies, trying to turn people against us. Mom's eyes were filled with worry. What if they do something drastic? I'm afraid of what they might do next. Her fear wasn't unfounded. Lisa and Ryan were becoming increasingly unpredictable, their actions driven by a mix of greed and desperation. The situation escalated further when Ryan took a more direct approach. One afternoon, as I was driving home from work, I saw Ryan's car parked suspiciously near our driveway. A chill ran down my spine. I parked my car and approached the house cautiously, only to find Ryan waiting at the door. "Clara," he said, his tone dangerously calm. "I need to talk to you." I tried to keep my voice steady. "What is it, Ryan?" He glanced around, making sure no one was watching. "I've had enough of this nonsense. You and your mother are ruining our lives." Before I could respond, Ryan's eyes narrowed. "You know I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get what we deserve. If that means taking matters into our own hands, then so be it." I felt a surge of alarm. "Are you threatening me?" Ryan's expression hardened. "I'm just saying that we're not going to sit back and let you take everything. We're prepared to fight no matter what." I took a step back, my heart racing. "Ryan, you need to stop this. This is getting out of hand." Ryan didn't say anything further, but his silence was more menacing than words. I quickly retreated inside, locking the door behind me. My mind was racing with the implications of his threats. Later that week, while I was at the hospital visiting Mom, the tension reached a breaking point. Lisa had been waiting for me in the hospital lobby, her face a mask of anger and frustration. "Clara, we need to talk," she snapped as soon as she saw me. I tried to stay calm. "Lisa, not here. This isn't the place." Lisa ignored me and continued, her voice rising. "I've had enough of your attitude. Do you think you can just push us aside and take everything? You don't understand what this means to us." Before I could respond, Lisa's eyes flashed with fury. "If you won't help us, then we'll find another way. We're not giving up." I attempted to defuse the situation. "Lisa, there's no need for this. We should be focusing on resolving this matter legally." But Lisa wasn't listening. Her frustration boiled over, and she made a lunge toward me. The hospital staff intervened quickly, pulling Lisa away before she could reach me. The scene was chaotic, and the commotion drew attention from other patients and staff. Seeing Lisa's outburst and realizing the danger Ryan posed, I knew we were in a precarious situation. Lisa and Ryan were no longer just fighting for money. Their actions were becoming increasingly reckless and violent. Their sense of entitlement had driven them to extreme measures, and I was left wondering just how far they would go. As the situation spiraled, I found myself grappling with a mix of fear and resolve. I knew that the only way to handle this was to stay calm, focus on the legal process, and protect Mom from further harm. But with Lisa and Ryan growing more desperate by the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more dangerous. The tension reached its peak in the weeks following the altercation at the hospital. Lisa and Ryan's desperation had reached a new level, and their actions were becoming increasingly erratic. It was clear they were willing to go to any lengths to secure their share of the inheritance. One particularly frightening evening, I received a call from the police. They informed me that Ryan had been caught trying to run me over with his car. The incident happened as I was leaving the grocery store. Fortunately, I had managed to evade him, but the situation was more than unsettling. The police were clear. Ryan faced serious charges for his attempted assault. The news spread quickly, and Ryan's criminal behavior further isolated Lisa and him from the community. They were no longer just seen as greedy and entitled, but also dangerous. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, relief that the situation was being addressed, but sorrow for how our family had been torn apart by greed and deceit. Mom was distraught. She had hoped that the situation would improve, but now she had to cope with the reality of having her family name tainted by Ryan's actions. Lisa, meanwhile, was struggling to come to terms with the situation. Her attempts to challenge the will had failed, and the legal battles were not in her favor. As her sense of entitlement clashed with reality, she became more isolated. Friends and acquaintances, once sympathetic to her plight, began to distance themselves. One evening, Lisa showed up at our front door, looking disheveled and desperate. She pleaded with me, her voice trembling. "Clara, I need your help. I can't deal with this anymore." Everything's falling apart. I looked at her with a mix of pity and resolve. Lisa, it's too late for that. The inheritance was never yours to begin with. You've made choices that have led to this point. I can't help you now. Tears streamed down her face. I thought that if I fought hard enough, I'd get what I deserved. Her pleas were heartbreaking, but I couldn't ignore the damage she and Ryan had caused. I closed the door, feeling the weight of the situation. As time passed, the dust settled. Ryan faced legal consequences for his actions, and Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had lost not only the potential inheritance, but also her place in the community and her relationship with the family. Her life was now a stark contrast to what it could have been if she had approached the situation differently. Mom and I slowly began to rebuild our lives. The inheritance, which had once seemed like a curse, now served as a reminder of the importance of integrity and hard work. I focused on my career, taking satisfaction in my achievements and the modest dividends from Dad's stocks. Looking back, the ordeal was a painful reminder of how greed and entitlement can lead to destruction. The family that had been torn apart by these traits was slowly mending, but the scars of the experience remained. I hope that in time, Lisa and Ryan will come to terms with their actions and find a way to rebuild their lives. As for me, I've learned valuable lessons about resilience and the true meaning of family. Despite everything, I am grateful for the support I received and the strength I found within myself. The story of our family's turmoil is a reminder that honesty and hard work will always prevail over deceit and greed. And as I move forward, I carry that lesson with me, knowing that integrity is the cornerstone of a meaningful life. After my dad's funeral, when everyone talked about who would inherit his money and stocks, my brother-in-law, Chris, who's married to my sister Kelly, suddenly declared that all of it, including the $5 million, should go to Kelly, the oldest sibling. My sister and Chris were ecstatic, but the lawyer quickly informed them they couldn't simply decide. My name is John Watson. I'm 42, work in sales, and have a wife and 2 kids. My dad owned a significant portion of a company, and even though he was old, he still worked. My sister Kelly, who's older than me, has always been a problem for our parents because of her bad behavior. Even now, in her middle years, she still doesn't have a steady job and just lives her life however she wants. I've never really liked her, so I've always kept my distance. Then, when she turned 50, out of the blue, she brought home this guy and announced she was getting married. The guy, Chris Adams, was young, energetic, and good-looking, but he was pretty lazy and not very pleasant. My sister started asking Dad for money for the wedding like it was no big deal. She blew through the cash quickly and then had the nerve to ask for more, which upset Dad. She figured she would inherit everything eventually, so why not? I just watched her with a cold stare. Less than a year after she got married, Dad had a heart attack while playing golf and passed away a few days later. It hit me hard, and I felt really sad. The sudden news of Dad's passing shocked all his friends, and our phones wouldn't stop ringing with condolences. But I couldn't just sit there and cry. I took charge, helping my stunned mom with all the arrangements for the funeral. As usual, my sister was nowhere to be found, off doing her own thing. After the funeral, utterly exhausted, Mom and I finally got a chance to catch our breath. But the very next day, a lawyer showed up at our door to talk about Dad's will. Mom and I already knew what was in it, but my sister and her husband barged in, clueless about the whole thing, and dropped a bombshell. All of Dad's stocks and the $5 million inheritance will go to my wife, the oldest daughter, so hands off, Chris declared with a triumphant grin. Mom and I were speechless at their audacity. We did it, Kelly. Now we're set for life. Chris cheered, fist pumping with joy. The lawyer, clearly surprised, spoke up, "Hold on a minute. My sister glared at him as he gave them a stern look and said, "Kelly, you're not entitled to any inheritance." My sister and Chris were stunned, protesting, "That can't be right. Kelly's the oldest daughter. She should get everything." It was clear Chris had been banking on that inheritance, assuming my sister would get it all. Their expressions shifted as the lawyer spoke softly. "Did you not know, Kelly, that you are not Mr. Watson's biological child?" Suddenly, my sister's face paled, her eyes darting to our mother. "Mom?" Our mother wore a complex expression. While I had always known my sister was a half-sibling, it seemed she had been kept in the dark. She began shaking our mother, almost frantic. "Mom, what does this mean? What does this mean?" "Kelly, you're from my previous marriage," our mother muttered, shaken by my sister's grip. My sister, who had often teased me about being the favorite child, now wore a stunned expression. But as she was legally adopted, she should still have inheritance rights, Chris interjected, his voice rising. "Isn't that so, Kelly?" "Yes, that's what I thought," my sister replied, but our mother shook her head. There had been no legal adoption. Both my sister and Chris seemed incredulous. "That can't be. I'm the oldest daughter. Even Dad said so." My sister's anger turned towards me. "I'm going to let you take everything," she snapped, to which I responded, irritated by her entitlement. "After all the support Dad gave you, you still say that?" "Be quiet." "It's his rightful heir," my sister and Chris protested. "But what's wrong with a father supporting his daughter?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. While it's normal for parents to support their children, your sister had been using my father's money to settle debts and deal with various troubles, Mrs. Watson, John's wife, who had been silent until now, suggested. "Why don't we let Kelly see the will too?" "The will?" "I have no idea about that," my sister panicked, although it was her fault for not paying attention. Dad wanted us all to discuss the will's contents when he made it, but my sister brushed it off and went out to play instead. When I pointed this out, Chris gave her a fierce glare. "What were you thinking?" This was important. Faced with the question of what to do next, they agreed to hear it. The lawyer then revealed Dad's will, stating clearly that the inheritance was for me and my mother. It also explained why Dad didn't adopt my sister initially. He intended to, but he grew disappointed with her behavior towards me, her half-brother, and her reckless spending as she got older. So I had no inheritance rights. Realizing this, my sister was stunned. "Damn it. What now?" Suddenly, Chris raised his voice, accusingly. "You lied to me. You said you had money." His demeanor turned aggressive, leaving my mother and sister shocked, but I wasn't surprised. Chris had often shown his greed. Perhaps he even married my sister for her money. "Kelly, don't come back until you've got some money," he commanded. "Wait, Chris, what do you mean? I thought I was going to be wealthy. What a letdown." Roughly pushing past my sister, Chris stormed out of the room. Left behind, my sister glared at us, her face riddled with anger, and cried out to our flustered mother, "Mom, why didn't you have me adopted? It's not fair that only you get the inheritance. I should have gotten something too, but you didn't handle it right. This is awful." She sobbed, making a scene. I was taken aback by her outburst, but the lawyer seemed unfazed, perhaps accustomed to such drama. "Why does he get everything?" "Because I'm Dad's son," I responded, and my sister's eyes filled with anger as she lunged at me, shouting, "You! It would have been better if you were never born." I thought to myself that even if I hadn't existed, Dad would likely have made the same decision, given my sister's character. Before I could say anything, the lawyer calmly intervened. "Kelly, if you continue like this, it will involve the police," making my sister flinch, possibly recalling her past shoplifting incidents. "Kelly," our mother called out, tears in her eyes. 6 months had passed, and the inheritance proceedings went smoothly without any hiccups, though my sister and Chris grumbled for a bit. The lawyer's efficient management left them with no room to meddle. My mother gave my sister some money, but I refrained from commenting on it. What bothered me most was their sudden disappearance with the funds, displaying their blatant gold-digging behavior, which left a sour taste in the mouths of our relatives who were aware of the situation. One day, I took my mother, wife, and daughter out for a meal. Thanks to my wife's suggestion, my mother, who had been somewhat withdrawn since Dad's passing, seemed more cheerful in the company of her adorable granddaughter. "Hey, Mom, why don't you come live with us?" I proposed, but you know Kelly might drop by sometimes. She only shows up when she needs money, right? Don't be too accommodating with her. My mother hesitated. Her reluctance was understandable given that my sister is her biological daughter. Plus, if our family moved into the family home, my sister might stir up trouble again. Respecting her concerns, I simply asked her to think it over. As I drove towards the family home to drop her off, we noticed lights on in the supposedly empty house. It wasn't the time for the helper to be there, so maybe my sister had returned. With that in mind, I parked the car in the garage. "Let's pop in for a quick coffee," I suggested as we stepped out of the car and headed towards the entrance. A car suddenly swerved towards us, narrowly missing us. Reacting to my daughter's cry, I instinctively shielded my wife. Ouch! Thankfully, the car only grazed me, but I was thrown into a nearby flower bed, taking a hard knock. The car came to a halt after hitting the garage entrance. "Are you all right, honey?" My wife and daughter rushed over to help me up while my mother stood trembling at the entrance, understandably shaken. Panic ensued. I was rushed to the hospital by ambulance and had to stay overnight. Later, I learned that the driver was Chris Adams, my brother-in-law. He claimed to the police that he mistook the accelerator for the brake, but I doubted his explanation. When my mother and sister visited me in the hospital, my sister looked at me coldly and remarked, "You're surprisingly resilient, aren't you?" I couldn't help but think that if I had been seriously injured, my mother would have inherited everything. "Too bad for you," I said with a smirk. My sister visibly tensed. "You were counting on it, weren't you?" I noticed her discomfort as she looked away. "Well, Mom told me she plans to waive her inheritance for me, so causing such an accident was pointless." My sister seemed taken aback by this revelation. It appeared incomprehensible to her that someone would refuse what they could inherit. "I have a wife and kids, so Mom asked me to pass it on to them." "That's what parents do," I explained. But, my sister stuttered. "I even made a will early on. Following Dad's example, I continued, leaving my sister speechless. So, unfortunately, my share won't be going to Mom anymore." My sister trembled and shook as she stared at me. "Can't you at least give me some? There's $5 million, right?" When I firmly refused, my sister's face contorted into a furious expression as she grabbed my collar. "Give me half. I'm your sister." I regarded her with pity as she continued to scream in an unsettling tone, perhaps driven to madness by the prospect of the inheritance. "Don't you realize that your greed would disappoint Dad?" My sister's face flushed with anger as she reached for my throat. "Kelly, what are you doing?" My mother returned, her voice raised as nurses arrived to escort my sister out. Although my mother seemed inclined to defend my sister, it was clear that my sister had directed insults towards her too. Where did I go wrong in raising her? It was heartbreaking to hear my mother say this with sadness in her voice. Shortly after, my mother fell ill. As her condition worsened, my wife and I stepped in to assist with transportation and household tasks at the family home. This seemed to upset my sister, likely because she had encountered my wife during her visits to ask for money or had heard about our help from our mother. One day, my sister called me abruptly. "From now on, we'll take care of Mom. You two don't need to come," she declared. "What's this all about?" I tried to reason with her, but my sister didn't listen and hung up, claiming it was already decided. I confirmed with my wife, who had received the same message and been dismissed. Concerned about my sister's lack of experience in caregiving or household duties, I quickly reached out to my mother. Surprisingly, Chris had some caregiving experience. At that point, my mother was still quite independent, so it seemed manageable for the time being. I felt a bit relieved. However, within a month, my mother was rushed to the hospital by ambulance due to a medication dosage error. She appeared alarmingly frail when we arrived. The doctor was puzzled. My mother had never made such a mistake before. While my wife stayed with her, I went back to the family home, which was in disarray. The fridge was empty despite my mother's love for cooking, and it seemed the hired help had been cancelled without discussion. I felt ashamed for even considering trusting my sister and was furious. A significant amount of money had been withdrawn from my mother's bank account, even though her bank card and PIN were secured in the safe. Thankfully, the account containing the inheritance was untouched in a safe deposit box, but most of the funds allocated for living expenses were gone. I gathered essential items for my mother's hospital stay along with her bank card and returned to explain the situation to her. Did Kelly? My mother seemed unaware of the bank card situation. However, when I inquired about the medication error, she looked somber and confessed that it was prepared by Chris. Mom, perhaps it's best not to allow my sister into the house anymore, I suggested. John, I promise to take care of you, but the house is in such disarray, and you've lost so much weight. Have you been eating properly? My mother's words weighed heavily on me. Mom, you should come live with us. I'll build a home where we can all be together, I proposed, causing my mother to break down in tears. However, her health continued to deteriorate despite the doctor's efforts. Perhaps the incident with my sister had weakened her heart. She never recovered and eventually passed away, almost as if following my father. Upon returning to the family home to make funeral arrangements, I discovered that all the valuables had vanished. It appeared my sister and Chris had taken them in their desperate pursuit of money. Standing amidst the empty rooms, I was first shocked and then consumed by a fierce anger. I vowed to hold them accountable for their actions. The day after my mother's funeral, my sister and I were scheduled to meet with the lawyer, presumably to discuss the inheritance. Too bad Mom's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, her daughter, my sister boldly declared. I couldn't help but chuckle at her statement, as it seemed she was gravely mistaken. Let's see what the will says, I suggested as the lawyer unveiled the will. My sister's face drained of color. No, this can't be. Kelly is not entitled to inherit anything. That's Dad's final wish. Chris exploded. However, the lawyer calmly reiterated the same statement. This is absurd. Kelly is that old woman's biological child. Chris angrily swept items off the table. You can't deceive us. Give us the inheritance now. Chris, did you try to harm my mom? I confronted him. He shot me an irritated glare. What? I never did such a thing, he retorted. Then why was there a mistake with her medication? I pressed further. Chris scowled in annoyance. Who cares about that, John? It's outrageous that we're not getting any inheritance, my sister interjected, seemingly losing her composure. What have you done? I asked her, stunned. It seemed she hadn't rushed over after hearing about our mother's passing, but had been banking on the inheritance to cover her expenses. Tell me this isn't true. I'm getting nothing, my sister demanded of the lawyer. Well, the lawyer began, carefully explaining the legal distribution of the inheritance. However, after deducting the amount my sister had withdrawn and the items she had sold, there was almost nothing left. She scratched her head in frustration. This outcome was reached after consulting with the lawyer in advance, I interjected. That can't be. It can't be this little, my sister muttered to herself, clearly dissatisfied. Having relied on our parents without ever experiencing the hardships of work, she seemed out of touch with reality. I couldn't contain my contempt for her. Mom thought you'd take care of her, but you just took her money and abandoned her. You ungrateful person. I couldn't hold back my anger. Taking care of someone costs money, you know? What are you talking about? My sister shot back. Then show me the detailed expenses you used for Mom's living costs. I'll cover the necessary expenses, I challenged her, extending my hand. My sister's face paled, and her lips trembled. I don't have that. Without receipts, it won't be recognized, the lawyer emphasized, leaving my sister speechless. Facing her, Chris attempted to sway me with a pleading tone. John, your sister needs help. Can't you lend her a hand, even just a little? I declined firmly, feeling my frustration growing. And it seemed Chris was reaching his limit too. If everything had gone as planned, Kelly would have had the entire inheritance by now, he muttered. What do you mean by that? I questioned, but before I could delve deeper, Chris let slip a revealing comment. Because of this guy, nothing ever goes smoothly. I was supposed to get a new car, but all I got was barely enough for repairs. My sister desperately tried to interject, but it was too late. That's a serious accusation. It sounds like fraud, the lawyer remarked, holding up a recorder and smiling at the couple. What? That's illegal. I clearly stated at the outset that this meeting would be recorded, and you both agreed to it, the lawyer said. Chris paled upon realizing his mistake. Turning to him, I declared, Chris, I'll be pressing charges for that accident. Don't be absurd. There's no evidence. You've just provided the evidence yourself. My sister burst into tears and shook Chris in frustration. You fool. It's all your fault. What are we going to do now? Eventually, Chris faced criminal charges. His previous offenses also came to light, leading to his detention by the police. My sister, implicated as an accomplice, received a lesser sentence. However, unable to afford her rent, she sought help from relatives, but was rejected by everyone. As for me, I continued to work diligently without relying on any inheritance, finding solace in the dividends from the stock as a small pleasure. Hi, I'm Callista. A few weeks ago, I lost my dad after he fought a long, difficult battle with his health. It's been really hard for me to accept that he's gone. Sometimes I catch myself wishing he could have met his grandchildren someday. That thought always leaves me with a heavy sigh because it's something that will never happen now. 6 years ago, when I was 33, I got married. It was one of the happiest days of my life, and on that special day, my dad and I made a promise to each other. We agreed that if I ever had a baby, I would tell him first. That was our little pact, something close to my heart. But sadly, I never got the chance to fulfill that promise, and it's one of my biggest regrets when I think about my dad. My dad's health took a turn for the worse about a year ago when he was diagnosed with his illness. From that moment on, I did everything I could to be there for him. I visited my childhood home more often than ever, spent hours sitting by his hospital bed with my mom, and made it a point to call or video chat with him as often as I could. Still, I sometimes wonder if I could have done more. I've caught myself whispering, was it enough? Did I do enough for him? My mom, who has always been my biggest support, would reassure me every time. Callista, you did everything you could. Your dad knew that, and he was proud of you, she would say, trying to ease my guilt. One day, as we sat together in the living room, my sister Eulalia walked in, followed by a man who looked to be in his late 38s. I assumed he was a lawyer. This is Jack, the attorney, Eulalia said, introducing him. My mom quickly offered him a seat, and we all sat down. Eulalia, unable to hold back, immediately blurted out, the lawyer said Dad left us a significant inheritance. I couldn't help but respond to her bluntness. Eulalia, you know it's not all yours, I said. My words were sharp, and the mood in the room shifted instantly. Eulalia and I have always had a rocky relationship, and things only got worse during our dad's illness. She had refused to visit him, even though I tried so many times to get her to come and spend some time with him. Her attitude created a wall between us, and it only grew taller during those hard days. Looking back, I realized my words to her were a bit harsh, driven by my frustration and love for our dad. But Eulalia's reaction didn't help matters. You're an adult. There's no need to be so stubborn, I told her. She snapped back. I'm not being stubborn. Living in the city and traveling all the way to the countryside isn't as simple as you think. It's just a 3-hour drive, I argued. Those 3 hours aren't just about time, Callista, she said angrily. It costs money too. And money is important to me. I'm busy, so stop nagging me about it. That was the end of that conversation. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't make the effort to visit, even just once. It wasn't about the distance for me, it was about showing Dad that he mattered. This disagreement drove an even bigger wedge between us, and by the time Dad passed away, she still hadn't visited him. The tension in the room grew until the lawyer gently stepped in, suggesting we all take a moment to calm down. I took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry. My apology seemed to ease the atmosphere a little. The lawyer then began to explain. As I mentioned over the phone, I'm here to discuss your father's will. My mom, looking puzzled, asked, "When was this arranged?" The lawyer replied, "It was about a few weeks before he passed. Your husband contacted me and asked me to come to the hospital." "Did you draft the will there at the hospital?" my mom asked, clearly surprised. "Yes," the lawyer explained. "Your husband wanted to make sure everything was in order. The will was prepared in the presence of his primary doctor, and it was arranged that the doctor would notify me after his passing. That's why I contacted you now." The lawyer then pulled out a white envelope and placed it on the table. My heart sank when I saw the handwriting on it. "That's definitely Dad's handwriting," I whispered softly, holding back tears. Eulalia, looking impatient, crossed her arms and said, "Can we just get on with it? I don't have all day." The lawyer smiled slightly and opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper that listed what Dad had left behind. The inheritance included the house, some land, savings, and something surprising, a storage shed. Eulalia immediately perked up and, with a frustrated tone, asked the lawyer, "Wait, what about the farm?" The lawyer looked surprised. "The farm?" "Yes, the farm," Eulalia said. "Dad used to work on it as a hobby." I explained that our father had run a successful business in a nearby town for many years. But when he turned 50, he decided to slow down. He wanted to focus on his hobbies, including working on a small farm near our home. Dad even considered shutting down his company to free up more time for himself. This new mention of the farm added an unexpected twist to the conversation about his legacy. During my high school years, I remember Dad often talking about the importance of slowing down and enjoying life. My sister Eulalia, who was in college at the time, didn't agree with his laid-back attitude. She believed that hard work and ambition were the keys to success and didn't see the value in Dad's decision. However, both my mom and I were more worried about Dad's health, so we supported him wholeheartedly. "Don't worry about the money, Eulalia," Dad had told her back then. "We've saved enough to take care of everything." Eulalia eventually gave a hesitant nod, though she didn't seem fully convinced. Shortly after that conversation, Dad began winding down his business operations. True to his word, he focused on farming and started spending more time working the land near our home. "There's something deeply satisfying about working with the soil," Dad would often say, his face lighting up with joy as he talked about growing vegetables and tending to the earth. Seeing him so happy confirmed for me that we had made the right choice. But Eulalia still seemed unsure. After graduating college, Eulalia had promised to return home and spend more time with the family. But instead, she built a career near her university. Eventually, she married the CEO of a successful IT firm she had met through her job. With her busy life in the city, she rarely visited home. As we talked about Dad's will, Eulalia insisted the farm should be part of the inheritance. Her insistence prompted the lawyer to take a closer look at the documents. After some digging, he discovered that the farm wasn't actually owned by Dad. It was leased land. "That can't be right," I said, surprised. "I had always assumed we owned the land where Dad farmed." Eulalia's expression changed as the realization sank in. It was disappointing, but in a way, it was also a relief. None of us knew much about farming, so maybe it was for the best. The discussion then moved to how the inheritance would be divided. "The house and the land directly surrounding it will go to your mother," the lawyer explained. Eulalia smirked, probably thinking about the rest of the assets that were still up for grabs. "What about the rest?" she asked eagerly. "The remaining assets include savings and a storage shed," the lawyer continued. "These will be divided equally between the three of you." "Savings? That means cash, right?" "I'll take that," Eulalia quickly declared, her eyes lighting up at the thought of the money. "The total savings amount to approximately $200,000, the lawyer informed us. This sum is not subject to inheritance tax." Eulalia leaned forward with excitement. "I want the $200,000 in cash," she said triumphantly, as though she had already won. Her confidence didn't sit well with me. "Hold on," I said, raising my voice a little. "I don't agree. Why should you get all the cash?" "Because I'm the eldest," Eulalia shot back, as if that was a good enough reason. "Fine," she added dismissively. "You can have the storage shed." "What's that even worth, anyway?" Her tone annoyed me, but I stayed calm. The lawyer clarified, the storage shed is located near the farm. Whoever inherits it will own the shed, the small patch of land it's on, and anything inside it. Suddenly, Eulalia seemed more interested. The mention of additional land caught her attention, even though it was just a small plot. It struck me as strange that someone married to a wealthy CEO would be so fixated on getting more. The lawyer continued, the land attached to the shed is about 75 square feet, roughly the size of a small bedroom. He then placed some photographs on the table to show us what the shed looked like. The photos revealed a neglected structure. The shed looked worn and weathered on the outside, and the inside wasn't much better. It was filled with simple gardening tools, things like hoses, scissors, and shovels. Nothing in the photos seemed particularly valuable. Eulalia's face twisted in disappointment as she studied the pictures. I don't want this, she said firmly, pushing the photos away. Her reaction didn't surprise me. The items in the shed had more sentimental value than monetary worth, and Eulalia clearly wasn't interested in sentiment. Fine, she said, waving her hand dismissively. You take the cash. I don't want anything to do with that rundown shed, Eulalia said firmly, her tone making it clear she was eager to distance herself from what she saw as a worthless piece of the inheritance. Hold on. That doesn't seem fair, I protested, realizing how unequal the division was. Eulalia had been quick to claim the $200,000 cash, which was clearly the most valuable part, leaving me with what she considered useless. Her confidence made me feel trapped, especially when my mom said, as long as Eulalia doesn't complain later, I don't see any issue with this arrangement. Complain? Why would I? Eulalia said, sounding almost smug. She was more than happy to take the money and leave me with the neglected shed. I couldn't hide my dissatisfaction, but before I could argue further, Eulalia dismissed me with a sharp remark. You care more about Dad than about money, right? She challenged. Her words caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. Of course, I valued family over money, but the way she brushed aside my feelings made me feel unsettled and dismissed. In the end, my mom inherited the house and surrounding land. Eulalia walked away with all of Dad's savings, and I was left with the shed. Eulalia even signed a document agreeing not to dispute the inheritance division, laughing confidently as she did so. Her carefree attitude only added to my frustration. Later, I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer and confronted my mom. Why didn't you support me? I asked, feeling hurt and let down. I did help, she insisted. I made sure you got the shed. But I'm not happy with just the shed, I argued, unable to see its value. You might find something wonderful if you give it a chance, Mom said with quiet optimism. Her words planted a small seed of hope in me. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to the shed than I realized. After receiving the key from the lawyer, I decided to visit the shed. It was located near the field, about a peaceful 25-minute walk from our house along an overgrown rural path. The field, which Dad had leased until his health began to decline, now lay empty and untouched. The stillness of the area added a solemn, almost forgotten feeling to the walk. When I reached the shed, I stood in front of its worn exterior for a moment, hesitating. Then I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and disuse, and everything was covered in a fine layer of dirt. Wow, this place hasn't been touched in ages, I muttered to myself. Despite the initial disappointment, I clung to the hope that I might find something of Dad's, a keepsake or a hidden treasure that would remind me of him. As I looked around, I saw that the shed was just as it appeared, a simple storage space filled with old farming tools. Shovels, hoses, and scissors lined the shelves, and there was nothing that immediately seemed special. Maybe I should just take what's here for now, I thought, my eyes scanning the dim, cluttered room. But as I continued to look around, something about the shed felt odd. The interior seemed smaller than the exterior, like there was less space inside than there should have been. Am I imagining things? I wondered. To make sure, I stepped outside and walked around the shed, trying to get a clearer perspective. That's when I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks, a second door, hidden behind a thick cluster of trees at the back of the shed. Wait, another entrance? I gasped, my heart racing. From inside, there had been no sign of this door. It was as if the space behind it didn't exist at all. The realization filled me with excitement and curiosity. Could this be one of Dad's secrets? He had always loved surprises, whether it was hiding gifts on my birthday or planning unexpected adventures. Memories of those moments with Dad brought tears to my eyes. This discovery felt like one of his little surprises waiting for me to uncover. Wiping my tears, I re-entered the shed, determined to find a way to open the hidden door. After searching through the tools and shelves, I found something unusual, a set of 3 small keys cleverly hidden in the handle of a shovel. My heart raced as I rushed back to the rear door, hope building with every step. I stood in front of the mysterious door, keys in hand, ready to find out what Dad might have left for me. With a deep breath, I inserted the first key into the lock, eager to see what secrets the shed held. I inserted one of the keys into the mysterious back door, and with a satisfying click, it unlocked. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a cramped, hidden space. Inside stood a single large safe, solitary and imposing. My heart raced as I stared at it, a whirlwind of thoughts flooding my mind. Is this from Dad's company? I wondered aloud, the sight sparking a mix of curiosity and nostalgia. The safe seemed to hold secrets, perhaps even a final message or gift from my father. It felt like he had left me a piece of himself to uncover, a personal treasure hunt for me to embark upon. As I stepped closer, recognition washed over me. This was the very same safe that used to sit in the corner of my dad's office, a sight I remembered vividly from my childhood. I could almost hear his voice and see him working at his desk. The connection was immediate and emotional, filling me with a deep sense of nostalgia. This discovery felt meaningful, as though Dad had planned it. But knowing him, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of his surprises. There's got to be more, I whispered to myself as I inserted the second key into the safe's lock. The lock clicked and the safe door creaked open, revealing its contents. My breath caught in my throat as I stared inside. The safe contained a collection of valuable watches, each carefully stored and well-preserved. Watches had always been one of Dad's passions, but I never realized how extensive his collection was. The sight left me amazed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Realizing the significance of this discovery, I quickly secured the safe and went to inform my mom. Later, with my husband's help, we transported the safe to our house. As we carried it, I couldn't help but think about the implications of what I had found. The watches were undoubtedly valuable and part of my inheritance, but I worried they might also bring legal or financial complications. Determined to handle everything properly, I contacted the lawyer we had consulted earlier. He suggested I seek advice from a certified public accountant, CPA, to navigate the potential tax implications. Taking his advice, I reached out to a CPA recommended by a friend. The accountant was thorough and helped me handle the necessary paperwork, ensuring that everything was in order. About a year passed, and I had almost settled into life with my newfound responsibilities when Eulalia unexpectedly showed up at my home. Her visit was surprising, especially considering how strained our relationship had been since the inheritance dispute. I was just in the area, she claimed casually, but her restless demeanor suggested otherwise. We lived 35 minutes apart, so her explanation didn't quite add up. Despite my suspicions, I invited her in and offered her coffee. As she sat down, she seemed uneasy, glancing around before blurting out, "Did you win the lottery or something?" Her question caught me off guard. "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. I didn't play the lottery, and it wasn't the season for my husband's holiday bonus. "What are you getting at?" I pressed, trying to understand. Eulalia's mood shifted suddenly to irritation. "Are you making fun of me?" she snapped. Her accusation left me even more puzzled. Her line of questioning seemed to come out of nowhere, and I couldn't figure out what she was hinting at. Finally, she admitted the reason for her curiosity. She explained that she had recently run into our aunt in the city. During their conversation, our aunt had mentioned receiving a $2,000 gift card from me as a thank you for visiting Dad during his illness. Eulalia jumped to conclusions. "You've come into some money, haven't you?" Just admit it, she pressed, her tone accusatory. I let out a sigh, realizing where her assumptions were coming from. It wasn't anything extravagant, I explained. I just wanted to show my appreciation. But Eulalia wasn't satisfied with my answer. Where did you get the money for that kind of gift? She demanded. Finally, I decided to tell her the truth. It came from Dad's inheritance, I said, explaining how I had discovered the safe in the dusty old shed she had so easily dismissed. Eulalia's eyes widened as I described the watches stored inside, a true treasure trove left by our father. Though I wasn't sure of their exact value, it was clear they were worth far more than we had initially realized. Those watches, I said, were part of Dad's passion. They're not just valuable. They hold sentimental meaning too. Eulalia seemed more intrigued than ever, but I knew this wasn't just about sentiment for her. What about taxes? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. That's already being handled, I replied calmly. I told her about my mother's advice to handle the situation transparently and how I had worked with the CPA to ensure everything was properly declared. Secrets have a way of coming out eventually, Mom had told me, and I took her words to heart. Eulalia didn't say much after that. She seemed to realize there wasn't much more to argue about. For me, the journey was about more than just the watches or their value. It was about discovering another side of my father, his love for surprises, his passions, and the thoughtful ways he had tried to connect with us even after he was gone. As Eulalia left that day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. My father's legacy wasn't just about money or possessions. It was about the memories he left behind and the lessons he taught us about family, honesty, and appreciating life's little joys. When I first spoke with a certified public accountant CPA about the inherited watches, I learned they could help manage the valuation and tax responsibilities. After a detailed review, we discovered that the collection was worth an astonishing $500,000. The value left me stunned, but it also meant one thing was certain. Inheritance tax would be due. The CPA's advice was straightforward. Keep the watches that had sentimental value and sell the others to someone who would appreciate and afford them. This plan made financial sense and felt emotionally right, as it allowed me to preserve the memories tied to my father while managing the practical side of things. From the sale of the watches, I was able to cover the inheritance tax and even share my gratitude with relatives who supported us during Dad's illness. I gifted them thank you cards, some with gift cards included, as a small token of appreciation. This gesture, however, had unintended consequences. It was what had sparked Eulalia's curiosity and led to the events that followed. Among the keepsakes, I decided to hold on to Dad's pocket watch. Though it wasn't the most expensive item, it was rich in memories. Dad often carried it with him, and seeing it reminded me of his gentle smile and comforting presence. I shared the story of the pocket watch with Eulalia, hoping she would understand its emotional value. Eulalia's reaction, however, was lukewarm. She seemed far more interested in what I had sold than in what I had kept. She asked several questions about the remaining watches and the safe, her curiosity growing. When I explained that the safe was now at Mom's house and mentioned its connection to Dad's old business, Eulalia fell into a thoughtful silence. Her demeanor left me uneasy, but to my relief, she left without pressing further. Still, an unsettling feeling lingered, and later that night, my fears were confirmed. A panicked call from my mom jolted me and my husband awake. She urged us to hurry to her house, her voice trembling with fear. We rushed over, only to be greeted by flashing red lights and police cars parked outside. A crowd had gathered, their murmurs adding to the tension of the scene. Pushing through the group, I found my mother, who was visibly shaken. She explained what had happened. While preparing for bed, she heard unusual noises coming from inside the house. It sounded like someone was searching through her belongings. Terrified, and with no one else home to help, she escaped through a window to seek safety. While hiding outside, Mom saw the eerie glow of a flashlight moving through the house, confirming her worst fears. A burglar was inside. Panicked, she ran to the neighbor's house, and they called the police. When the authorities arrived, the intruder was revealed to be none other than Eulalia. She had decided to break into the house after hearing about the safe earlier that day. Her reckless actions had caused immense distress for Mom and the neighbor, who had no way of knowing her intentions. Caught off guard by the police, Eulalia panicked and tried to flee. Ironically, in her rush to escape, she collided with the very safe she had been searching for. The heavy object toppled over, trapping her beneath it. She screamed in pain, drawing everyone's attention. Paramedics were called, and Eulalia was rushed to the hospital with a leg injury. The whole situation left us in disbelief. Mom and I apologized to the police for the misunderstanding, but the chaos didn't end there. When I called Eulalia's husband to inform him of what had happened, I learned a shocking truth. Eulalia had been hiding a significant amount of debt due to her lavish spending on luxury items. Her husband explained that they had recently argued after he discovered the extent of her financial mismanagement. Eulalia had already spent her entire inheritance trying to cover her debts. That night, she had stormed out, determined to borrow money from Mom. When Mom refused to help, Eulalia decided to take matters into her own hands, leading to the disastrous break-in. The news of Eulalia's actions was the final straw for her husband. At the hospital, he confronted her and announced his decision to file for divorce. Eulalia, in shock, adamantly refused. "I'm not getting a divorce. Absolutely not," she insisted. But her husband was firm. He presented her with divorce papers, laying out the undeniable evidence of their fractured relationship. With no other option, Eulalia reluctantly signed the papers, her face a mixture of shock and resignation. Now confined to her hospital bed, Eulalia seemed to be taking a hard look at her situation. I noticed her flipping through a part-time job magazine, perhaps realizing it was time to take responsibility for her actions. While the events were heartbreaking, this small step offered a glimmer of hope that Eulalia might finally turn things around. As for me, the chaos of the past year had made me think deeply about my own life and family. I decided it was time to move back to my childhood home. While my primary concern was Mom's safety and well-being, there was also a happier reason for the move. I had discovered I was expecting a baby. After discussing it with my husband, we agreed that moving in with Mom would provide the support we needed as we prepared for our growing family. Though I couldn't share the joyous news with Dad, I found comfort in believing that he would have been thrilled. As I look ahead to this new chapter, I feel a mix of hope and peace. Despite the recent family struggles, the thought of welcoming a healthy child fills me with optimism. Life may have thrown challenges my way, but it's also given me the chance to start anew, surrounded by love and the memories of those who matter most. My name is Anna, and I'm 27 years old. I've spent almost my entire working life at the family company in Chicago, a business my father built from the ground up. It's a company worth $200 million, a testament to his relentless work and vision. Growing up, I watched my father dedicate countless hours to the business, working late into the night and making sacrifices to ensure its success. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a pioneer who believed in the value of hard work and dedication. My parents always encouraged me to follow my path, but despite their support for my independence, I felt a deep connection to the company. I wanted to be part of something that represented my father's dreams and efforts. So, after college, I chose to stay and contribute to the business rather than seek a career elsewhere. I was lucky to have Sam, a seasoned employee, as my mentor. Sam, who was likely in his mid-40s, had a wealth of experience and a patient demeanor that made him an ideal guide. He helped me understand the inner workings of the company, teaching me everything from the basics to the more complex aspects of running a $200 million enterprise. His mentorship was crucial in my development, and I took pride in learning every detail about the business. My older brother, Jake, 29, had a different vision. He pursued a college education in management and always saw himself as the future president of the company. Jake's approach was less about dedication and more about entitlement. He viewed the company as his ticket to a life of luxury, and his lifestyle reflected this attitude: expensive tastes and a love for the high life. Jake married Lisa, a woman in her late 20s who shared his appreciation for opulence. Their home was a showcase of their wealth, and they were often seen at high-profile events, embodying the image of future success they aspired to. Our father's sudden passing was a shock to everyone. It was especially hard for me as I had to cope with both the loss of my father and the responsibility of taking over the company. When the day of the will reading arrived, Jake and Lisa were away on vacation, enjoying their luxurious lifestyle while we dealt with the aftermath of our father's death. They returned just in time for the reading of the will. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation. We gathered in the conference room, and Mr. Stevens, the family lawyer, prepared to read the will. Jake and Lisa arrived with an air of casual superiority, seemingly expecting the will to confirm Jake's ascension as the new president. Mr. Stevens began reading the will, and my heart pounded as I awaited the outcome. As per the wishes of John Thompson, Mr. Stevens announced the company, including all its assets valued at $200 million, will be inherited by Anna Thompson. The room fell silent. Jake's face went pale, and Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. The reality of the situation had hit hard, and the room seemed to hold its breath as Jake and Lisa absorbed the news. "This can't be right," Jake finally said, his voice shaky. "I'm supposed to be the president. I've been preparing for this my entire life." Mr. Stevens remained calm. "The will is legally binding, Mr. Thompson. Your father's wishes were clear." Jake's disbelief turned into anger. My father must have been mistaken. How could he leave everything to Anna? She's never been involved in the high-level decisions. Lisa, standing by Jake's side, added angrily, "Anna, she's just a low-level employee compared to Jake. This isn't fair." The employees, including Sam, who had been quietly observing, exchanged knowing glances. They had seen my dedication and hard work over the years. Sam stepped forward to support me. "Anna has been here every day, learning and working alongside us. She's shown genuine commitment to the company. This decision reflects her true contributions and potential." Jake's anger flared. "This is ridiculous. I should be the one leading this company. It's my birthright." Lisa, clearly upset, added, "We should contest this will. This isn't right, and we won't accept it." Despite their protests, the will was clear. My father's decision was made, and it was now up to me to step into the role of president. The weight of this responsibility was heavy, but I was determined to honor my father's legacy and prove myself worthy of the trust he had placed in me. In the days that followed, I prepared to take on my new role while grappling with the emotional impact of losing my father. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a challenging journey. The events that were about to unfold would reveal the true nature of those around me and test my resolve in ways I had never imagined. The days following the reading of the will were a whirlwind. Jake and Lisa's protests did little to change the situation. Despite their anger and disbelief, the will was legally binding, and I was officially named the president of the company. Jake, now ousted from his position, had to come to terms with the new reality. He and Lisa were forced to sell their mansion, a symbol of their extravagant lifestyle, to manage their finances. Watching Jake and Lisa's struggle was surreal. They had lived in such luxury, and now they were facing the harsh realities of their choices. Jake's arrogance had always shielded him from the real world, and Lisa's dependence on their high status left them both unprepared for the sudden shift. With no real skills or experience outside of their former life, Jake took a part-time job at a convenience store while Lisa found work as a cashier at a supermarket. It was a stark contrast to their previous life, and their pride made the transition even harder. As for me, I was determined to prove myself. The transition wasn't easy, but I knew it was essential to keep the company on track. With Sam's guidance, I began to familiarize myself with the intricate details of running a $200 million enterprise. Sam continued to be an invaluable mentor, helping me navigate the complexities of the business and the challenges that came with my new role. The company, despite its success, was not without its issues. There were long-standing problems and areas for improvement that needed immediate attention. I spent countless hours reviewing financial reports, meeting with department heads, and making decisions that would impact the future of the business. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but I was committed to honoring my father's legacy. One of the first things I did was address the concerns of the employees. They had been with the company through thick and thin, and their support was crucial. I called a meeting to reassure them of my commitment to the company and to listen to their feedback. "Thank you all for coming," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I know the past few weeks have been difficult, and I want you to know that I'm here to support the company and all of you. My father's vision was for this company to thrive, and I intend to see that vision fulfilled. The employees seemed receptive, and Sam gave me a reassuring nod. Their support was something I valued deeply, and I made it a point to foster a positive working environment. I wanted to create a culture where hard work and dedication were recognized and rewarded. Despite my efforts, Jake and Lisa's presence lingered in my mind. Their situation was a stark reminder of the consequences of entitlement and arrogance. I had always believed in earning one's place through hard work and respect for others, and the contrast between my approach and Jake's became even more apparent. Jake had always felt that the company was his by right, while I had worked tirelessly to understand and contribute to its success. One day, as I was going through some old documents, I found a letter from my father. It was a note of encouragement and advice written shortly before his passing. In it, he spoke about the values he hoped I would carry forward: integrity, dedication, and respect. Reading his words gave me strength and reminded me of the responsibility I had inherited. The letter ended with a simple message: Anna, remember that true leadership comes from within. It's not about what you're given, but what you choose to do with it. Lead with your heart and honor the legacy we've built together. I kept the letter in a frame on my desk as a daily reminder of my father's words. Each decision I made and each challenge I faced was guided by his advice. I wanted to lead in a way that would make him proud and uphold the values he had instilled in me. As time went on, the company began to show signs of recovery and growth. The efforts I had put in started to pay off, and the unity among the employees strengthened. The transition was far from easy, but with perseverance and a focus on genuine effort, I was beginning to see the fruits of my labor. However, the shadow of Jake and Lisa's downfall remained. I knew that their story was a cautionary tale of what happens when entitlement outweighs hard work. It was a stark reminder of the importance of humility and respect, values that I had embraced wholeheartedly. The journey had just begun, and there were many challenges ahead. I was determined to face them head-on, guided by my father's legacy and the support of those who truly believed in the company's future. Little did I know the path ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, revealing the true character of everyone involved and shaping the future of the company in ways I could only hope for. Months passed, and life at the company began to settle into a new rhythm. We were making progress, and I felt more confident in my role. The company was regaining its footing, and our efforts were starting to show. But amid our successes, Jake and Lisa's struggle was a constant reminder of how their sense of entitlement had led to their downfall. I still heard occasional snippets about Jake's situation through mutual acquaintances. The news was often grim. Jake's job at the convenience store was menial compared to the high status he once enjoyed. Lisa, too, faced challenges working as a cashier, a role far removed from the luxurious lifestyle she had been accustomed to. Their pride made it difficult for them to openly discuss their difficulties, but it was evident that their lives had been turned upside down. One afternoon, I received a call from Sam. Anna, I think you should come by the office early tomorrow. We need to discuss some issues that have come up. The tone of his voice was serious, and I could tell it was something important. I agreed to meet him, and the next morning I arrived at the office early. Sam was already there, waiting in his office. "Good morning, Anna," Sam said, motioning for me to sit down. "We've been having some issues with one of our major clients. They're considering pulling their account due to some unresolved problems." I listened intently as Sam outlined the situation. The client's dissatisfaction was largely due to some lapses in our service, which had happened before I took over. It was a critical account, and losing it would be a significant blow to the company. "We need to act quickly," Sam continued. "I've already scheduled a meeting with the client, but we need to come up with a plan to address their concerns and convince them to stay." I spent the rest of the day working on a strategy to save the account. It was a challenge, but I was determined to resolve the issue. By the end of the day, we had a comprehensive plan in place, and I felt confident about the upcoming meeting. The meeting with the client went well. I presented our plan and assured them that we were taking immediate action to address their concerns. After a tense discussion, they agreed to give us another chance. It was a relief and a testament to the hard work of everyone involved. As the days went by, the company continued to improve. We were regaining lost ground and building a stronger foundation for the future. But despite the progress, Jake and Lisa's situation weighed heavily on my mind. Their story was a painful reminder of the consequences of entitlement and arrogance. One evening, I received an unexpected visitor at the office. Jake, looking weary and disheveled, stood at the door. I was taken aback. "Anna," he said, his voice tinged with frustration and desperation. "Can we talk?" I nodded and invited him in. We sat in my office, and he began to speak, his tone a mix of bitterness and resignation. "I didn't think it would be this hard," Jake admitted. "Lisa and I thought we could get by on our past status, but we were wrong. It's been a tough road, and I'm struggling to find a way back." I listened, trying to understand his perspective. "Jake, you've always believed that the company was your right, but it wasn't just about the position. It was about the work and respect that come with it. Entitlement doesn't lead to success. Hard work and humility do." Jake's face showed a flicker of realization, but he didn't respond immediately. "I know you're right," he finally said. "I guess I didn't fully appreciate that until now. I've been trying to make sense of it all." We talked for a while longer. It was a difficult conversation, but it was clear that Jake was beginning to understand the importance of the values I had embraced. His journey was far from over, but perhaps there was a chance for him to rebuild, not just his life, but his understanding of what true success meant. As Jake left the office, I felt a mixture of emotions. It was hard to see him in such a state, but it was also a reminder of the importance of the path I had chosen. The contrast between our journeys was stark. While I worked hard to restore and build the company, Jake faced the harsh reality of his choices. The lessons from these experiences were becoming increasingly clear. True leadership and success come from genuine effort and respect for others, not from entitlement or a sense of inherited privilege. It was a painful but necessary lesson, and it was shaping both our lives in ways we hadn't anticipated. Little did I know the challenges ahead would test these lessons even further, revealing more about our characters and the true nature of success. The months that followed Jake's visit were transformative for both him and me. While I continued to focus on strengthening the company, Jake and Lisa were slowly adjusting to their new reality. Their struggle was evident, but so was Jake's effort to learn from his past mistakes. One day, I received a call from Sam, who sounded unusually excited. "Anna, I think you should come to the office. There's something you need to see." When I arrived, Sam was waiting with a wide grin. "Look at this," he said, handing me a document. It was an article from a major business magazine featuring our company. The headline read, "Chicago's Resilient Business: How Dedication and Leadership Made a Difference." The article praised the company's turnaround under my leadership and highlighted the improvements we had made. It was a moment of pride and validation for all the hard work we had put in. As I read the article, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. The company, now valued at $200 million, was thriving and gaining recognition. The sense of accomplishment was immense, but it was also a reminder of the values that had guided us through tough times: humility, hard work, and respect. A few days later, I received a letter from Jake. In it, he expressed his regret for his past behavior and acknowledged the lessons he had learned. He wrote about his ongoing efforts to rebuild his life and find a new sense of purpose. "I've come to understand that success isn't just about a title or wealth," he wrote. "It's about the work you put in and the respect you earn along the way. I'm learning that now, and I wanted to thank you for showing me that." The letter was heartfelt, and it was clear that Jake was making an effort to change his perspective. It wasn't an easy road for him, but the acknowledgement of his mistakes and his willingness to learn were significant steps in the right direction. Life at the company continued to be fulfilling. With the support of Sam and the rest of the team, we created a strong, cohesive environment where everyone felt valued. The challenges we faced only strengthened our resolve and deepened our commitment to the values we believed in. Jake and Lisa's story was a poignant reminder of how entitlement and arrogance could lead to hardship, while genuine effort and humility paved the way to true success. Our paths had diverged significantly, but the lessons learned were invaluable. As I looked out from my office window, reflecting on the journey we had been through, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The company was thriving, my efforts had paid off, and the values of hard work and respect had guided us to success. Jake's journey was still unfolding, and while he faced his challenges, it was clear that he was on a path of growth. Our stories were intertwined by the lessons we had learned and the contrasts that had shaped our lives. In the end, the true measure of success was not in the inheritance or the titles we held, but in the character we built and the impact we made. The story of our family and the company was a testament to the power of hard work, humility, and genuine leadership.
My mother-in-law told me that a woman who is so indolent that she ought to move out of the house. They're blaming me. My mother-in-law tilted her head to stare at me. You are not needed here. I will take care of Mom and Scott, my sister-in-law remarked. You constantly appear so worn out and depressed. With a look of contempt, my sister-in-law, who doesn't do any housework at all, remarked this. Hold on, Scott. Your sister and mother are too harsh. My spouse has always been the one I turn to for support, but like Mom and sister, he also expressed disdain. A wife is useless if she can't do household tasks and is solely focused on her career. You are no longer needed because I have a wonderful relationship with a young part-time employee. Hurriedly pack your belongings and depart. I was stunned while the three of them cast me out of the house. While listening to their words, I looked down and clenched my fists tightly. Still, I tried to remain as calm as possible and said, Understood. I will leave. The downfall of the family that has always put everything on me is about to begin. My name is Kristen. I am 32 years old, working at a company while taking care of my family. Nowadays, most women continue to work after marriage, and since I'm passionate about my job, I have continued to work at the company I joined as a new graduate. During a busy morning preparation, my husband started a conversation. Hey, Kristen, can you take care of this? The deadline for the tax return is approaching. He handed me a pile of bills and receipts. Again, I wish you'd handle your own shop's accounts. I replied seriously, but Scott averted his gaze. You know I'm not good at this kind of detailed work, right? You're always a big help. Thank you. Scott and I got married 5 years ago. He was working at a restaurant I frequented, and our conversation there led to us getting along. As we got to know each other better, we started dating and eventually got married. Scott has fulfilled his long-term dream of opening a cafe and is currently running it. However, when it comes to tasks like buying office supplies and accounting, he tends to rely on me, just like with the taxes. Sighing, I headed towards the entrance when my mother approached me. Kristen, I feel like eating Chinese today. Can you take care of it? Understood. Could you please wash the rice instead? My mother-in-law frowned and said, Why do I have to do it? I don't want to. You should come home early and take care of it. Also, Jenny and the kids will be back this weekend, so please prepare meals that the children can eat. What? Okay, understood. I reluctantly answered and left the scene. When Scott and I got married, I had hoped for a life with just the two of us. However, Scott had a different idea. My father passed away and my sister is already married, so I'm worried about leaving Mom alone. Since the house is big, I think it's good for us to live together. I had no choice but to agree. As a result, we started living in my mother-in-law's house with her. When we first started living with my mother-in-law, who is not good at household chores, the house was quite messy. After my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law had been living on her pension alone. That pension was mostly used for eating out, as she hated cooking. Scott sees household chores as a woman's job and shows no willingness to help while continuing to work full-time. I am responsible for all the household chores. Jenny, my sister-in-law, also comes back often with her children, even after getting married and leaving the house. When she comes over, the burden of household chores naturally doubles. This morning, when I heard that they would be coming over this weekend, I thought to myself, not again. While thinking about this, the dreaded weekend arrived. Ideally, weekends away from work should be a time to rest, but when Jenny's children come asking to play, it's hard to say no. While taking care of the children all by myself, I also need to prepare meals. In the midst of this business, my sister-in-law made an unexpected statement. "Kristen, I'm actually in the midst of getting a divorce and will be staying here with the children starting next month. Hope to get along with you." I hadn't heard about that. I answered in surprise, "What's the matter? Do you have a problem with it?" In response to my sister-in-law's dissatisfied reply, I hurriedly answered, "No, it's not like that. Rather, that must have been hard, going through a divorce. When are you planning to move in?" "The sooner the better," she answered. Knowing that my sister-in-law and her children would be coming back, I was initially bewildered, but soon tried to think positively. Since my sister-in-law was a full-time housewife, I thought she would surely be a help with household chores. I hoped that my burden would be lessened. Although I am not particularly close to my sister-in-law, I was hopeful that my load would be lighter. However, that hope was quickly shattered. Perhaps due to being raised by my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law also did not help with any household chores, spending all day in front of the TV and eating snacks. She did not engage in any domestic or external work. I heard that a major factor behind her divorce was her neglect of household duties. I ended up doing the household chores instead of my sister-in-law, as well as preparing meals for her children, who are picky eaters. Additionally, preparing for kindergarten drop-offs also became my role. As time went on, I became busier with a new project at work. This led to more days requiring late-night overtime and early morning starts. Upon returning home, the place was so messy that finding a spot to step on the floor was difficult, and I was utterly exhausted. The minute I would come back from work, my family would complain, "Isn't dinner ready yet? Why are you so late?" As I struggled to manage household chores due to my busy schedule, I began receiving harsh comments from my mother and sister-in-law. My mother-in-law said, "The laundry is piling up. Don't cut corners just because you're busy with work." I replied, "Mother, I'm also busy with work." My sister-in-law criticized, "Look how defiant she is towards her mother-in-law. Kristen is scared. And the meals are already made. Since you are also home all the time, could you perhaps help a little?" I suggested. Then my mother-in-law said, "Why would you make Jenny work? Besides, since Scott is a business owner, you shouldn't have to work. If you insist on working, you should at least manage household chores perfectly." I was speechless at her statement, but they looked at me as if it was obvious. That night, feeling at my limit, I talked to Scott. I said, "Even though I understand that work is busy, your mother and sister won't help at all. I'm at my limit." Scott retorted with a glare, "Are you trying to badmouth my mother and sister?" I replied, "It's not like that, but managing everything alone is impossible. I wish at least you would support me. I'm busy with the business. You might not understand since you're just an employee, but running a store is really hard. Don't make your work my burden." Still, as I was at a loss for words, Scott fell asleep then and there, leaving me to ponder alone again. However, shortly after, a good idea came to me. I quickly completed some online shopping and then took the rest of the day off. A few days later, various new household appliances were delivered to our home. I bought a drum washing machine, a cleaning robot, and kitchen appliances that cook automatically. Since there was no one to help with household chores, I wanted to reduce the burden as much as possible. Therefore, I decided to introduce the latest household appliances to make life more convenient. While the washing machine was being delivered, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law came over. "Did you buy a new washing machine without asking?" The old one still works. My mother-in-law approached me with a look of dissatisfaction. But this will make laundry much easier and faster, I replied cheerfully. However, my mother-in-law seemed unconvinced. Loudly, what do you mean? What's the matter? Buying appliances to make it easier for you with the household money? What were you thinking? I'm not trying to be lazy. I just want to make household chores more efficient, I argued back. It's not about that, my mother-in-law criticized. People nowadays rely too much on machines for everything. Then my sister-in-law joined in. Exactly, Kristen. The appliances are still good, and those. Scott is a business owner. You're wasting too much money. While my sister-in-law glared at me, Scott also seemed to nod in agreement next to her. I tried to argue back, but my sister-in-law didn't let me finish. Always looking for the easy way out, and you can't even do household chores properly. What were you thinking? She criticized me. Despite wanting to fight back, I remained silent. Angered by my silence, my mother-in-law couldn't hold back anymore and blurted out, "A lazy wife who neglects her chores like this should leave the house." Shocked by her words, I looked at my mother-in-law, who was glaring at me. "With Mom and Scott here, we don't need you." Always looking so tired and spreading gloom like a parasite, my sister-in-law hurled harsh words at me too, her tone filled with utter disdain. "Wait, Scott, your mother and sister's way of speaking is too cruel." I've always sought Scott's support, but Scott scornfully replied, "What Mom and sister are saying is right. A wife who can't manage household chores is not needed." I stared at Scott in surprise, but he just sneered. "I run a business and have the freedom to spend money. A wife who shops selfishly just to make her own life easier is not needed." I couldn't hide my astonishment and said, "Why would you say that? I'm currently seeing a young part-timer." "She's attractive, unlike you. Your presence is no longer needed. Pack your things and leave immediately." Scott coldly uttered those words. Stunned by his words, I was subjected to their criticism of being a failure as a wife. While listening to them, I looked down and clenched my fists in anger. After being used and then spoken to in such a manner, I vowed to myself, "I'll show them. I'll make them regret this." Facing them with as little change in expression as possible, I said quietly, "Understood. I will leave." "Finally got it. We'll be better off without a useless wife," my mother-in-law said contemptuously. Ignoring her words, I took out something specific from the living room drawer. "Scott, let's get divorced," I said, presenting him with a pre-filled divorce form. Exhausted, I had prepared the divorce form in advance as insurance. "Fine, I'll sign it. Don't blame me if you regret it," Scott said mockingly and signed the divorce form on the spot. That day, I packed all my belongings and moved to a short-stay apartment with the divorce form in hand. No one saw me off. Soon after, I submitted the divorce form to the city hall and rented an apartment in my name. Almost simultaneously with the divorce being finalized, I accepted a promotion opportunity that I had previously turned down due to household responsibilities, finally becoming a manager and achieving career advancement that I had long given up on further fueled my passion for work. An environment where no one hindered my tasks was my greatest joy. About a week after leaving the house, I started receiving calls from my former mother-in-law. However, I was busy and had no desire to speak with someone who had once looked down on me, so I consistently ignored her calls. A year passed, and one holiday, while I was relaxing at home, I received another call from my former mother-in-law. This time, I decided to answer the phone and end it once and for all. "Hello." "Kristen, you finally answered. You're terrible. How could you ignore my calls for a whole year?" I could hear my mother-in-law's flustered voice from the other end. "Do you need something?" I responded indifferently. "Well, first, how are you doing, Kristen? Are you doing well?" My mother-in-law's tone was probing. "How I'm doing? I've rented an apartment for myself and am working hard. I've been promoted and my income has increased. I'm living a comfortable life. My former mother-in-law sounded a bit puzzled but continued, Really? So Kristen, would you consider coming back? Trying to persuade me to come back, I felt a chill at her sugary voice but asked, Why now? Actually, we're in a tight financial situation. I said coldly with a smile, I see. I heard Scott's Cafe is making less than $11,000 a month, and neither you nor your daughter are helping, right? You knew that. I was well aware that Scott's Cafe was only making about $800 a month in profit since I was in charge of the accounting. Despite boasting about being a business owner, Scott had not been managing sales or administrative tasks properly and seemed unaware of the reality. I was handling the accounting and buying, so I'm well aware of the situation. Well, you should have said something. I had no idea that you were a manager at a major company and financially providing for us, my former mother-in-law said. Yes, indeed. I was contributing over $3,000 a month to the household. That was the basis of your living. After I left, Scott must have realized for the first time that he couldn't make ends meet with just his cafe's income. My former mother-in-law pleaded earnestly, Kristen, please, I want you to come back. By the way, how is Scott's Cafe doing now? I asked out of curiosity. That place might not last till next month. The part-timer has also left. That's to be expected. With such careless management, it's impossible to maintain the store. Who would want to work under someone who is high in self-esteem but slacks off on important tasks? I laughed as I spoke. My former mother-in-law was left speechless on the other end of the phone. Shall we end this conversation? I'll be busy from here on out. In a panicked tone, my former mother-in-law said, Wait, since you left, the house has become a complete mess. A mess? What do you mean? I inquired. According to my former mother-in-law, the house had become completely disorganized since there was no one to take care of the chores. With children around and no one to tidy up, the house was cluttered. No one was cooking, and they had to rely on eating out or buying meals, leading to increased food expenses. Additionally, the washing machine broke, and they had no funds to purchase a new one. My mother-in-law said if only you had left those appliances behind. Counted? Aren't those the appliances you called for being lazy? Why shouldn't I be able to take with me what I bought with my own money? I regret saying such things, but I never imagined that the house would change so much just because there was no one to do the chores. I confronted my former mother-in-law's angry demeanor. Why is it that 3 adults can't do household chores? What are my sister-in-law and Scott doing? My former mother-in-law spoke in a calm voice. Scott has been unsettled since the part-timer left, and the cafe's income stopped. Since then, he just stays at home and doesn't help with anything. Oh, so much for being a business owner who could freely spend money, I replied sarcastically. Moreover, Jenny hasn't made any move towards employment and has abandoned household duties. On top of that, she keeps asking me for pocket money for herself and her children. My pension isn't enough to cover all this. I was told by your daughter that you didn't need me because she was there, right? My sharp retort was met with more sweet talk from my former mother-in-law. Kristen, please, I can't make ends meet with just my pension. I have no intention of returning. Nevertheless, it seems like your children are quite the parasites, aren't they? I said, leaving my former mother-in-law without a rebuttal. As I was about to hang up, she pleaded even more. Kristen, we'll change our ways, so please come back and let's live happily like before. What? How can one live happily with an unwanted wife? I scoffed. After a moment of confusion, my former mother-in-law appealed further. I admit our mistakes. We're family, so let's help each other out. Without help, we won't be able to pay the property tax and we'll have to sell the house. I have no obligation or affection to extend my help. Please sort it out yourselves, I said. The unwanted wife will take her leave. Ignoring her screams, I turned off the phone and blocked my former mother-in-law's number. Relaxing at my clean home and enjoying a cup of coffee, a smile crossed my face. 3 months later, when I happened to pass by the location of Scott's former cafe, it was already an empty lot. The store had indeed closed. Furthermore, a sold sign was up at my former in-law's house. From a conversation with a neighbor I met by chance, I learned they had hurriedly sold the house and were now living a difficult life in a small apartment, causing trouble with daily arguments and unpleasant smells, and receiving numerous complaints from neighbors. It's so typical of them, not supporting themselves and their household through honest work and independence. I looked at my former in-law's house with a detached gaze and left. Meanwhile, I continued to focus on my work. Recently, a sincere and earnest colleague asked me out, and we started dating with marriage in mind. Remarriage doesn't seem to be that far away. This time, I truly hope I'll find happiness. It's unthinkable for someone without an academic background like you to teach. It will negatively affect her academics, so stay away. My sister-in-law directed her anger at me upon learning that I was supporting my niece academically. Sophia, why are you interacting with someone like her? What will you do if you end up like her? My sister-in-law seemed to perceive my presence as something harmful. Her cold attitude drained my patience. Amy, think before you speak. Who do you think contributes to our comfortable life? Isn't it because Mary works hard at home? I responded to my mother-in-law's gentle words. My sister-in-law became even more emotional. Why are you defending her? Isn't it her duty to handle household chores? She exclaimed. She's not just doing housework. She works hard and contributes a lot to the household. You just gallivant around without contributing. If anything, you should be grateful to Mary. Do you really believe she's working earnestly? I can't imagine someone like her being interested in essential tasks. My sister-in-law then grabbed my desktop computer and threw it out of the window. What are you doing? You're probably pretending to work hard without achieving anything. Leave this house immediately. I rushed outside to check on my computer, but it was damaged irreparably. I had also lost the valuable work data I had saved. I was genuinely shocked and disappointed by her immature actions. I couldn't imagine continuing to live together under such circumstances. I had been tolerating it for the sake of my relationship with my husband and mother-in-law, but this incident pushed me beyond my limits. I left a message and decided to return to my parents. I am Mary, 29 years old. Last year, I started a new life with my beloved husband, Sean. Initially, we imagined living in a city apartment as we both worked nearby. However, Sean was always concerned about his mother's health. His mother often experienced knee pain due to her previous job, and walking even a short distance required frequent breaks. Knowing this, we suggested living together. Upon hearing our proposal, she brightened up and said, "Mary, you want to live with us? I'm so happy." She's a genuinely kind-hearted person and warmly welcomed me. However, there was a concern. My sister-in-law, Amy, was obsessed with academic backgrounds. During our first family meal, my educational background came up, and her demeanor changed. "Mary, you didn't go to college, right? Why would Sean choose someone like you?" She spoke to me in a somewhat harsh manner. I said, "That's not a nice thing to say, but you graduated from a national university. Sean and I graduated from a famous private university. Couldn't you find someone smarter and more charming? What's the merit of marrying someone with a lower education?" At her words, my mother-in-law reprimanded Amy. "Stop it, Mary. I'm sorry for the rude things," she said, but I was already left speechless on the spot. My mother-in-law also looked down, biting her lip. I grew up with my hard-working mother. After losing my father at a young age and being unable to afford college, I started working. In such circumstances, I was fortunate to be able to work at a tax accountant's office, and then another opportunity came my way. My boss said, "Why don't you try getting a certified public accountant qualification? Mary, I believe you can do it," giving me encouragement. With his support, I embarked on a new challenge, hoping to secure better job opportunities and income to support my mother more. My husband understood this and conveyed my efforts to my sister-in-law. However, she remained cold. If Mary becomes pregnant, I hope the child won't take after her and will be intelligent. Such words came out of her mouth. Those words struck me deeply and unexpectedly. I wondered if I felt this way just because I had only a high school diploma. Although I found it perplexing, I didn't want to escalate the situation, so I refrained from further discussion. After that, my sister-in-law would often mock me over trivial things. For example, when I was cooking, she'd say things like, "Mary, can't you do it a bit faster?" Or during casual conversations, she would comment, "I really had fun during my university days," in a way that seemed to mock me. What bothered me was that she would say similar things to her daughter, Sophia. She would repeatedly advise Sophia, "When you grow up, make sure to go to a good university." Sophia, being a kind-hearted child, seemed to always listen to her mother's words obediently. My sister-in-law had high expectations for Sophia and was now starting to prepare for her junior high school entrance exam. The school Sophia was aiming for was S Academy Junior High, where my sister-in-law worked part-time. Although she doesn't have a teaching license and isn't a regular teacher, she took this role because she wanted to avoid additional responsibilities and work. She would deliberately say, "Is Sophia in front of me? Let's work hard together for the future." It was so frustrating that I would bite my lip, but when I thought of my beloved husband and my kind mother-in-law, I didn't have the courage to confront my sister-in-law. I didn't want to drag them into any trouble. My sister-in-law and I only met a few times a year. I kept telling myself that if I just endured her behavior, everything would be okay. However, an unexpected development awaited us. One day, my sister-in-law suddenly came to our house holding Sophia's hand. "Mom, I got divorced, so we'll be staying here for a while. Please take care of us," she said nonchalantly, sitting on the living room sofa as if it were her home. Both my mother-in-law and I were shocked by this sudden news. What? Divorce? Why all of a sudden? What happened? My mother-in-law's face was filled with surprise and concern. My sister-in-law responded with a sigh. That man was so annoying. Till the end, he kept complaining about the smallest things and never listened to me. But to divorce just because of that. Before my mother-in-law could continue, she stopped herself. "It's not just that," my sister-in-law replied with a bitter smile. "When I asked for alimony during the divorce, he only agreed to pay $600. After being together for so long, I was shocked by the amount, so I thought it would be better to come back home, where I don't have to worry about living expenses. Plus, I wanted to spend more time with you, Mom." She showed a slight smile and held her mother's hand. "I can live peacefully in this house." She then laid back on the sofa, scrolling through her smartphone, with packed bags and boxes scattered around the room. My mother-in-law and I were lost for words, watching this chaotic scene. A look of surprise and confusion was evident on my mother-in-law's face, and I shared those feelings as well. After a while, my sister-in-law handed me some of her clothes, asking, "Mary, can you wash these for me later?" I suggested that they should be sent to the dry cleaners, but she replied, self-centered, "You could do that much for me, right?" From then on, not only did her requests increase, but her troublesome behavior also intensified. One day I discovered an oil-based pen stain on the laundry, which was clearly her doing. Upon seeing me sigh at the stain, she remarked smugly, "Oh, did I make a little mistake? People with low education can't even do housework properly, can they? I wonder if there's any value in living for someone as useless as you." Her actions were causing my stress levels to peak. I reached my breaking point and finally decided to discuss it with my husband. "I work all day and still have to deal with housework when I get home. It's a real burden when she purposely makes things dirty." "I understand it's hard for me to see you going through this," my husband replied, listening to me quietly. He promised we'd find a solution together. That night, he confronted my sister-in-law about her behavior. My husband's warm words and actions always gave me a sense of security. However, from the next day, the harassment from my sister-in-law escalated even further. You think Sean protects you, don't you? But to others, you just seem overly dependent. Relying only on a man doesn't make you strong. I don't have any intention of being dependent. Depending on someone, being protected by them, to others you might seem like a coward. Can't you stand on your own? Holding back my emotions became harder with each of my sister-in-law's words. Despite facing many hardships in life and taking pride in overcoming them, I couldn't stand being hurt by her words. Seeing my distress, my husband seemed wary from the constant confrontations with his sister and began avoiding her. However, my sister-in-law's harassment didn't stop with me. It began affecting Sophia as well. She was keen on getting Sophia admitted to S Academy and was eager to send her to a tutoring school. Sophia, what's this test score? You can't get into S Academy with these grades. I'm sorry if your grades don't improve. Maybe you will need to hire a tutor. But remember, it's up to how hard you work. Sophia, looking like she was on the verge of tears, nodded. She had already been going to cram school every day after school. Getting a private tutor would make her lose any free time she had left. Feeling sorry for Sophia, I offered, "Do you want to study with me? I can help you with some things." "Really? Of course, I'm here for you." From then on, we started studying together, careful not to get noticed by my sister-in-law. Although Sophia sometimes struggled, she grasped concepts when taught patiently. "Mary, I got 80 points on my test." "That's great. Sophia, you worked really hard." Sharing that success brought genuine warmth to our hearts. My mother-in-law, who noticed our efforts, sometimes cheered us up secretly by sharing delicious cakes with us. The time spent with her and Sophia became my healing moments. However, this peaceful time was short-lived. One day, while studying with Sophia, my sister-in-law unexpectedly returned home. Seeing us, she shouted, "What are you doing? You, with no formal education, are teaching her. I can't believe it. You might make her grades drop. Stay away." Furthermore, my sister-in-law slapped Sophia on the shoulder and yelled at her, "Why are you spending time with her? Do you want to end up like her?" The way she spoke about me, as if I was contagious, made my anger boil over. All the things I had been holding back just overflowed. As I told you before, I only graduated high school due to financial reasons. Judging someone solely based on their educational background is wrong. "What did you say?" My sister-in-law exploded even more. Hearing the commotion, my mother-in-law intervened. "What's happening here? Mary is getting too close to Sophia. What if her low educational background influences Sophia? Do you know who's ensuring our comfortable lifestyle? Haven't you seen how hard Mary works at home?" My mother-in-law's calm and pointed words only fueled my sister-in-law's anger. "Why are you defending her? Anybody can do household chores. It's not just chores. She's working hard, contributing to our household. All you do is go out and play, indifferent to what's happening at home. You should be more grateful." "Are you saying she has a proper job? I can't believe it." With that, my sister-in-law grabbed my PC from the desk and threw it out the window. "Why would you do that? That job you cherish so much probably isn't that big of a deal. Stop acting so pretentious. Just leave this house already." I rushed outside in a panic to check my computer, but it was broken beyond repair. It contained my work's vital data. I felt anger and disappointment toward her childish behavior. Living together with someone like this was then impossible. For a long time, I had valued my relationship with my husband and mother-in-law, trying to protect our household. However, I had reached my limits. That night, I left a note and decided to return to my parents' home. The next morning, I received repeated calls from my sister-in-law, but I ignored all of them. However, within a week, my husband and sister-in-law showed up at my workplace. He strongly conveyed his apologies, saying, Amy's completely wrong this time. Amy, please apologize sincerely." Though encouraged by Sean, her dissatisfaction was evident from her attitude. "Why should I apologize? Sophia's grades have clearly dropped in her absence. Mary's presence must have been important, not only for Sophia, but for you as well." Indeed, I had felt guilty deep down about Sophia's academic struggles. It seems there's no other way. "Mary, come back home and support Sophia's studies." "I never wanted to live with someone with your educational background, but I'll endure it for Sophia's sake." I had wanted to return for Sophia's sake, but her arrogant tone nearly extinguished that desire. "If you truly care about Sophia's education, why don't you teach her yourself, Amy? You strongly recommended her to study for exams, so why are you neglecting her? I don't want to be told anything by someone like you. I encourage Sophia to study for exams because I don't want her to end up in a lowly position like you." Is that really all there is to it? I want Sophia to grow up to be an elite adult like me. I want her to graduate from a renowned university and build a career like the one I've established at the prestigious S Academy. She continued flaunting her own success. Unable to bear the exchange, my company's director intervened and tried to resolve the matter peacefully. "Excuse me, I assume you are Mary's family. Nice to meet you." "Yes, that's right. My husband greeted the director politely. I have overheard a little. I'd like to affirm that Mary has shown tremendous capability and contributed significantly to our company." "Really? I never thought you'd hire someone with just a high school degree." Education doesn't solely define a person's abilities. Even compared to university graduates, Mary has been producing equal, if not better, results. My director's words left my sister-in-law with a surprised expression. "Do you truly believe that? I think educational background determines one's status and value." The director responded, "Carly, you mentioned you work at S Academy. May I have your name?" "My name is Amy Smith." "You're Miss Smith. I've heard about your troublesome attitude and behavior. Are you representing Mary?" "No, I haven't heard about you from Mary, but I have heard about you from the principal and other staff at S Academy." Amy's eyes widened, clearly taken aback. "Here's the reason." The director handed her a business card. It clearly read, "S Academy Board Chairman." "You're the chairman." Both my husband and I were utterly shocked, lost for words upon understanding the information on the card. Amy's demeanor changed instantly, her eyes filled with fear and surprise. "I've heard about your behavior and issues within the academy, delegating your work, shirking responsibilities, and even discriminatory actions toward students. Numerous problems have been pointed out." In a panicked state, Amy responded, "That's not true." "Of course I was considering a direct response," the director said. Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law started to panic. "I can't lose my current job. I just got divorced and it's tough to support my daughter and myself." She begged desperately with a serious look on her face. The principal replied calmly but with deep understanding, "Our school's policies and philosophies are clear. We cannot tolerate work behavior like yours." My sister-in-law was devastated and burst into tears on the spot. The next day, an official notice from S Academy confirmed that she had to leave the school. Unable to hide her shock, she returned home in confusion. Afterwards, she locked herself in her room, and occasionally, voices of anger and dissatisfaction could be heard. This situation started affecting the family dynamics. Her stress was often directed at Sophia and her mother, and the tension in the household grew day by day. "How can you not even solve this simple problem for a sixth grader? This is unacceptable. You will not rest or sleep until you finish this textbook tonight, so make sure you get it right." Sophia had been studying under this strict guidance day after day. Her fatigue was evident on her face, and I was worried she might follow in Amy's footsteps. "Stop pushing Sophia like this. Think about what you're doing." My mother-in-law interjected, unable to bear the situation. "Mom, shut up. I don't want to hear anything you say." Taking the situation seriously, my mother-in-law finally told Amy to leave the house. "Amy, you can't stay here any longer. Leave now." "Why should I be the one to leave? You're the one pushing Sophia to the brink and harming her mental health. If you care about her as your own daughter, leave this house now." "I can't believe you're trying to take my daughter away from me." My mother-in-law asked the distressed Sophia, "Sophia, what do you want? Do you want to stay in this house or go somewhere else with your mother?" Sophia's answer was clear. "I want to stay in this house. I'm scared to be with Mom." Shocked by these words, Amy lowered her head and cried, but my mother-in-law's resolve was firm, and she escorted her daughter out of the house. Reflect sincerely on your actions. What you did can never be tolerated. With that, my mother-in-law closed the door. Afterwards, my sister-in-law ended up losing her job and home. She tried various jobs, but due to her personality, she struggled and her difficult life continued. With her gone, I returned to my mother-in-law's home and regained our peaceful daily life. Sophia began to smile every day and found her peace of mind again. As a couple, we made the decision to help her when we found out that she wanted to finish her education. A year later, Sophia's perseverance paid off when she passed the S Academy entrance exam. We were truly relieved and happy. Sophia is currently working very hard to fulfill her dream of becoming a teacher, and we intend to help her in her chosen career path.
My name is Sandra, and I'm a 19-year-old college student living in Seattle. My story, though it may seem ordinary at first glance, is anything but. It begins with the death of my father and an inheritance that would change everything. When I was 13, my parents divorced. It was a painful and confusing time for me. My mother, Linda, did her best to shield me from the worst of it, but the emotional distance between us grew. Then, a few years later, my father passed away unexpectedly. He left behind a substantial inheritance of $10 million, which I could only access when I turned 19. It was a sum that promised financial security, but I had no idea how it would stir up trouble. By the time I reached 19, I had just begun to settle into college life, enjoying the freedom and new experiences it offered. Living with my mom and my stepfather, Ron had become a routine. Ron had been married to Mom for 6 years, and though I had tried to get along with him, there was always a tension that hung in the air. One afternoon, while I was studying in my room, Ron knocked on my door. He looked unusually serious. "Sandra, we need to talk," he said. I put down my book and followed him to the living room. Ron sat down on the couch, his expression stern. "I know you've recently come into a significant amount of money from your father's estate," he began. "Your stepbrother, Jake, needs financial help for college. I think it would be best if you considered giving him a portion of your inheritance to help cover his tuition." The request took me by surprise. Jake, who was 21 and in his 3rd year of college, had never shown much interest in being part of my life. The thought of just handing over a portion of my inheritance seemed unfair and rushed. I had worked hard to manage my finances and was planning for my future. "I'm sorry, Ron," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I don't think it's fair for me to give Jake my inheritance. I've planned to use it for my own education and future needs." Ron's face tightened. "Sandra, you don't understand. It's not just about fairness, it's about family. We've been trying to support Jake, and this could make a huge difference for him." I shook my head. "I still don't think it's right. I need to think about my future too." Ron's demeanor shifted from pleading to aggressive. "You're being selfish. This money was meant to help you, but you could use it to help your family. Don't make me force this issue." I felt a chill run down my spine. His words and the way he spoke were menacing. "You can't just tell me what to do with my inheritance, and I don't want to discuss this further right now." Ron's eyes narrowed. "Don't tell your mother about this conversation," he warned as I walked away. "It's between us." The unease that settled over me grew heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ron's insistence on my inheritance was more than just concern for Jake's education. Something about his behavior seemed off. I decided to investigate. Late one night, when everyone was asleep, I quietly accessed Ron's computer. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I had to find out why he was so intent on my money. As I scanned through his emails, my heart raced with every new message I opened. My suspicion proved correct. I found emails between Ron and a woman named Carla, discussing not only their plans to divorce my mother, but also cryptic references to a shady business deal. My hands trembled as I read through the messages. They mentioned something about money laundering and potentially drug-related activities. The more I read, the more horrified I became. The next morning, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I knew I had to confront Ron and Jake. I needed to protect my inheritance and my mother from whatever Ron was planning, but how? I decided to record a conversation with them, hoping to gather evidence that would prove Ron's deceitful intentions. When Ron and Jake were in the living room, I walked in, trying to appear casual. "Hey, can I talk to you guys for a moment?" I asked. I slyly turned on my phone's recording feature as I took a seat. Ron seemed uncomfortable but agreed. "What's on your mind, Sandra?" "I just want to understand why you're so adamant about me giving my inheritance to Jake," I began. "What's going on?" Ron shifted in his seat. "Sandra, we've talked about this. Jake needs this money, and it's only fair." Jake nodded in agreement, though his face was expressionless. "Yeah, Sandra. It's not like we're asking for the whole amount." I kept pressing, trying to get Ron to slip up. "I've been doing some thinking. Maybe I should check things out more thoroughly before making any decisions." Ron's patience wore thin. "Sandra, you need to trust us. We're looking out for you." "I'm just trying to be cautious," I said, feigning innocence. "I'll think about it." As I left the room, I felt a sense of impending confrontation. I had enough evidence to raise serious questions. What I didn't know was how deep Ron's deceit went and what it would take to protect my family and my future. In the days that followed, I was consumed by worry. The conversation with Ron and Jake had left me feeling uneasy, but I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to dig deeper. The recordings I had made provided no immediate proof of wrongdoing, so I decided to investigate further. While Linda, my mother, was away on a work trip, I found myself alone with Ron and Jake. It was a perfect opportunity to search through Ron's things, hoping to uncover more about his shady dealings. I spent hours sifting through files on his desk and searching his personal computer. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I made my move. I returned to Ron's computer, which was left unattended. My heart pounded as I navigated through his email accounts and documents. I had hoped for something concrete, anything that would reveal Ron's true intentions. After some time, I stumbled upon a thread of emails between Ron and Carla. The messages were filled with coded language about transactions and cleaning up money. It was clear that Ron and Carla were involved in something illicit. The emails mentioned laundering money and hinted at connections to drug trafficking. The more I read, the more I realized the gravity of Ron's schemes. My hands shook as I copied the emails to a flash drive. I needed to have undeniable evidence, so I also took screenshots of key documents and financial statements linked to Ron's shady business. It was a risk, but I had to act quickly before Ron discovered I was snooping around. The next step was to gather more information about Ron's involvement with Carla. I decided to follow Ron one day when he claimed he was going to a business meeting. I trailed him discreetly, my heart racing with every turn. My intuition led me to an old warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle, a place that seemed out of place for a typical business meeting. From a distance, I saw Ron enter the building with a briefcase. I waited for hours, my anxiety mounting. When Ron finally emerged, he seemed more agitated than usual. I made a mental note of the warehouse's location and the time he left. The next morning, I confronted Jake. I knew he was involved in some way and needed him to reveal more about Ron's activities. "Jake, can we talk?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I need to know what's going on with the inheritance." Jake looked at me with a blank expression. "We've been through this, Sandra. It's about helping the family." "I'm not sure I believe that," I said, pressing on. "I've been finding out more about Ron and Carla. There's something not right." Jake's face hardened. "Sandra, you're overreacting. You don't know what you're talking about." I didn't press further, but I noted his defensiveness. The conversation confirmed my fears. Ron had manipulated Jake as well. I knew that confronting Ron directly wouldn't work. I needed my mother to be involved to see the truth. I decided to gather all my findings and present them to Linda, but how would she react? She was away on a business trip, and I had to be careful about how I approached her. Finally, I managed to reach Linda via phone. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Ron and the inheritance. Linda sounded concerned. Sandra, I'm busy with work. Can't it wait until I get back? I don't think so, Mom. It's urgent, I insisted. Please just listen to what I have to say. Reluctantly, Linda agreed to a call later that evening. I gathered all the evidence I had, copies of emails, screenshots of documents, and notes from my surveillance. It was time to show her what I had uncovered. When the call came, I presented the evidence to Linda, speaking as clearly and calmly as I could. Mom, I've discovered something disturbing. Ron and Carla are involved in illegal activities, including money laundering and possibly drug trafficking. Here's the evidence. Linda listened in stunned silence. Sandra, I don't know what to say. I know it's hard to believe, I said, but I need you to look at these documents and see for yourself. Linda promised to review everything and get back to me. The waiting was agonizing, but I had done all I could for now. My mother's reaction would be crucial in determining the next steps. The truth was out there, but whether she would believe it was a different matter. The following days were filled with tension. I anxiously awaited Linda's response to the evidence I had sent her. I hoped she would see the truth in my findings and act on them. The weight of the situation was almost unbearable, and every time my phone rang, my heart leaped, expecting it to be my mother. One afternoon, Linda finally called. Her voice was tight with emotion. Sandra, I went through the documents and emails you sent me. I can't believe it, but it looks like you're right. Ron and Carla are involved in some serious illegal activities. Relief and dread mingled in my chest. What are we going to do, Mom? I'm hiring a private investigator, Linda said firmly. We need to confirm everything before we take any action. I'll be back in Seattle soon. True to her word, Linda returned a few days later with a private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Kate. Kate quickly got to work examining the evidence I had gathered and conducting her investigation. She followed Ron's activities and scrutinized the warehouse I had spotted. As the days passed, the tension in our house became palpable. Ron was increasingly suspicious of my behavior. He kept asking about my interactions with Linda and seemed on edge whenever he was around me. Jake, on the other hand, continued to act like nothing was wrong, though his demeanor was guarded. Linda and Kate's investigations soon bore fruit. Kate confirmed that Ron and Carla were indeed involved in money laundering and had ties to drug-related activities. Armed with this new evidence, Linda and I knew it was time for a confrontation. We planned our move carefully. One evening, we gathered in the living room with Ron and Jake. Linda, her voice steady despite her obvious anger, started the conversation. Ron, Sandra, and I have discovered some things about your activities that we need to discuss. Ron's face hardened. What are you talking about? Linda calmly placed a folder of evidence on the table. We know about your affair with Carla and your involvement in illegal schemes. The private investigator has confirmed everything. Ron's face turned pale as he glanced at the documents. You have no proof. This is all nonsense. I have plenty of proof, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And it's not just the documents. We know about the money laundering and the drug connections. Jake, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. Ron, is this true? Ron shot him a warning look. Jake, stay out of this. The tension was electric as Linda and I waited for Ron's reaction. He seemed to weigh his options, and then his face twisted with rage. You think you can just accuse me and get away with it? You're the one who's been lying and manipulating us. You're not going to get away with this, Linda said. Ron's anger reached a boiling point. He stood up abruptly and advanced toward me. You should have stayed out of this, Sandra. I'll make sure you regret this. Before Ron could act on his threat, Kate, the private investigator, stepped forward and flashed her badge. Ron, we have enough evidence to have you arrested. I suggest you cooperate. Ron's bluster faltered as he realized the seriousness of the situation. This is a setup, he mumbled, but his bravado was gone. Linda, Her eyes full of resolve, addressed Ron one last time. "You have two choices. Turn yourself in, or we'll make sure the police get involved." Ron's face contorted with defeat as he realized the game was up. The confrontation had been intense, but now that the next step was clear, the police would be notified, and Ron's fate would be decided. As Ron left the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a surge of relief. We had taken a significant step toward justice, but the situation was far from over. The coming days would bring more challenges, but at least now we were on the path to exposing the truth and seeking justice. The confrontation with Ron marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, but it wasn't the end. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and personal turmoil. Linda and I worked closely with the authorities, providing all the evidence we had gathered. The situation felt surreal as we watched Ron's empire of deceit crumble. The day the police came to arrest Ron and Jake, I could hardly believe it. I stood in the living room, watching through the window as the police car pulled up. My heart raced as officers escorted Ron and Jake out of the house. Ron's face was a mix of anger and humiliation, while Jake looked stunned and confused. Linda and I had to stay composed throughout this process. We provided statements to the police and attended meetings with lawyers. The legal system moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, and Ron's attempts to deny his involvement only made things worse. News of the arrests spread quickly, and soon Ron was facing charges not just for money laundering and drug-related crimes, but also for his affair with Carla and the plans to divorce Linda under pretenses. Linda and I were determined to stay strong despite the emotional toll. We knew we had to see this through. The courtroom drama was intense, but watching Ron being held accountable for his actions was a form of closure. The hearings were covered by local media, and it became clear that Ron's reputation was in shambles. He had gone from being a respected figure in the community to a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. During the trial, Linda made the difficult decision to file for divorce. It was a painful process, but she knew she couldn't remain married to someone who had betrayed her trust in such a profound way. The divorce proceedings were finalized, and Linda felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It was a significant step toward reclaiming her life and moving forward. After the trial, the relief we felt was palpable. The nightmare was finally over, and Ron's criminal activities were exposed for all to see. Jake faced legal consequences as well, though his role was less significant compared to Ron's. He seemed to come to terms with the reality of his situation and accepted responsibility for his part in the scheme. With the legal battles behind us, Linda and I began to focus on rebuilding our lives. The trauma of the past months had brought us closer together. We spent more time together, talking about our hopes and dreams for the future. The bond between us, strengthened by adversity, became a source of comfort and strength. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new normal. Linda and I found solace in each other's company, and we worked on restoring a sense of peace and stability. We even began to make plans for the future, looking forward to a life free from the shadows of deceit and manipulation. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized how crucial it had been to stand up for the truth, despite the fear and uncertainty. Facing the situation head-on had led to justice being served. It wasn't just about the inheritance or the legal battle, it was about reclaiming our lives and ensuring that integrity triumphed over deceit. As we moved forward, Linda and I found joy in the simple things, our shared moments, our renewed trust in each other, and the promise of a brighter future. We were stronger and more resilient than ever, having faced the darkest aspects of our family dynamics and come out on the other side with our dignity intact. In the end, Sandra and Linda were not just survivors of a treacherous ordeal, but symbols of resilience and the power of standing up against manipulation and betrayal. The journey had been arduous, but it taught us invaluable lessons about trust, integrity, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity.
From the moment we met, I knew there was no affinity between us. There's no room in this place for a creature like you, a woman bearing a child. Return to where you belong. On the day of my brother's wedding, my sister-in-law unleashed a torrent of insults upon me. It was meant to be a joyous occasion, one where I yearned to share in happiness, yet her words cut deep. Unable to endure such treatment any longer, I made the difficult decision to abstain from attending the ceremony. My name is Clarissa H. I juggle part-time employment with managing household duties. 3 years ago, I married my husband, Nathaniel, who is 2 years my senior. He works as a buyer and salesperson at a major department store. Nathaniel's fresh appearance contributes to his strong sales performance. Having always wanted children, we went through fertility treatments and were overjoyed when we finally conceived our first child. I was especially thrilled to have a child with a man I love, and I couldn't wait to share the news with him. When I told Nathaniel, he was ecstatic. "Nathaniel, it looks like we've been truly blessed." "Really? Does that mean?" "Yes, it's really happening. We're going to have a baby." "Seriously?" I'm so overwhelmed with joy, I can't stop crying. My husband's tears mirrored my own as he expressed his gratitude, embracing me tightly. From that moment on, we eagerly anticipated the arrival of our little one, each day filled with excitement and expectation. But there was someone else eagerly awaiting the birth, my brother, Thomas, 4 years my senior. Thomas has cherished me since childhood, a bond that remains unbreakable even as adults. He was aware of our struggles with infertility, so when I shared the news of my pregnancy, his joy matched that of my husband's, tears included. I've heard that our mother back home was so thrilled by the news that she was left utterly speechless. Whether it was my marriage or now my pregnancy, my brother has always wanted the best for me. I hold my brother in the same high regard. 2 months into my pregnancy, my brother reached out to speak with me. "What did you want to talk about, Thomas?" I asked directly, noticing his hesitant demeanor. He scratched his head nervously and replied, "Well, I'm getting married." "Married? Really, Thomas?" My brother attended an all-boys school for middle and high school, then studied at a male-dominated science department at university. The fact that he might have a girlfriend had never crossed my mind. Despite our parents' suggestions for arranged meetings to set him up with a woman, he always declined. I think he's quite handsome, but his reserved nature in the past may have limited his chances with women. So, hearing that he's getting married now is a shock I can't hide. "I imagine this is a surprise," he said. "I know it seems sudden." "Definitely." "So, who's the lucky woman?" I asked. "She's 3 years younger than me, so just 1 year older than you, Clarissa. Her name is Vivian, and we met through work." "Really? What's her connection to your job?" "Well, she's the daughter of the president of one of our business partners." "The president's daughter? That's incredible." "It sounds like something straight out of a movie," I gasped in astonishment. My brother chuckled. "You're making a big deal out of this. Even though she comes from such a background, she's putting in the work at her father's company. We're both getting older and thought it was the right time to take this step." Seeing my brother so earnest about his future warmed my heart. He, who has always hoped for my happiness, had finally found someone special to share his life with. The thought made me feel as if I were celebrating my own good fortune. A month later, my brother introduced his fiancée to us in our apartment. "Nice to meet you. I'm Vivian, your brother's fiancée," she said. Vivian exuded elegance and sophistication, clearly embodying the image of a career-driven woman. Observing her poised demeanor, I couldn't help but feel like we came from entirely different worlds. "Nice to meet you, Vivian. I'm Clarissa, the younger sister," I greeted her. "Ah, the little sister," she responded, casting a quick glance over me. For a moment, it felt as though her gaze pierced right through me, though I brushed it off as mere imagination. Yet it soon became apparent that my intuition was accurate. Throughout our interaction, she directed minimal attention toward me, instead focusing her conversation on my husband, Nathaniel. "Your work as a salesperson at that esteemed department store is truly impressive," she remarked, engaging him in conversation. Caught off guard, my husband responded awkwardly, "Oh, well, thank you. I haven't had the chance to shop recently. Would you mind recommending something suitable for me next time I visit?" she inquired, her attention firmly fixed on him. "Of course, thank you. We'll be looking forward to your visit," he replied. It was evident that Vivian treated my husband and me differently. It seemed she might be trying to flirt with my husband. Still, I didn't want to dampen the mood, especially since my brother had chosen her as his partner. Just as my brother wished for my happiness, I wanted him to find joy as well. I couldn't let something as minor as her distant demeanor towards me affect my brother's happiness. Despite my concerns, I kept quiet. From then on, Vivian started frequenting the department store where my husband works. One day, my husband came home and let out a sigh of frustration. "Vivian stopped by my section again today." "Again? She was just there yesterday too, wasn't she?" "Yeah. She's buying quite a bit, which is fine, but, even when I'm assisting other customers, she interrupts without any regard. It's causing inconvenience for the other sales staff as well. So, it's becoming a bit of a hassle, you know." That does sound challenging. According to my husband, each time she visits, Vivian makes purchases worth thousands of dollars. While it's beneficial for the store, my husband expressed concern. Despite her status as the president's daughter, her spending habits might raise some red flags. Several months later, the eagerly awaited day of my brother's wedding finally arrived. By then, I was well into the later stages of my pregnancy, my belly prominently showing. It was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion for my dear brother, and I was certain it would be a beautiful ceremony. I felt a rush of excitement as I left the house, adorned in a maternity party dress I had purchased specifically for this special day. The situation unfolded when I arrived at the venue and approached the reception desk. "I'm Clarissa Smith, the groom's sister, and this is my husband, Nathaniel," I said, providing my name to the receptionist. She seemed confused. Are you the groom's sister?" "Yes, I'm Thomas Harris's sister," I confirmed. "That's odd," she responded, then said something unexpected. "We were told that the groom's sister wouldn't be attending." "What? That can't be right. I'm his sister, of course I'm here." "Well, we were informed that the groom's sister had other commitments and wouldn't be coming." "Hold on, there must be some mistake. My husband and I were both planning to attend. Mr. Smith is listed as a guest and is confirmed. The cancellation only applies to you, the sister." I found myself at a loss for words, stunned by this unexpected twist. Turning to the receptionist, my husband inquired, "Who informed you that my wife wouldn't be attending?" "It was the bride," came the reply. "Vivian?" my husband questioned, a hint of suspicion creeping into his voice as he sensed something amiss. His expression hardened. "Could you please fetch Vivian?" he requested firmly. Shortly after, Vivian and a woman who appeared to be her mother approached us, confirming the unsettling truth. I confronted Vivian directly. "Vivian, what's going on? Am I marked as absent?" "Well, it seems that's the situation," she responded nonchalantly. "Wait just a minute. I never once indicated that I wouldn't be attending," I protested, incredulous. With a sneer, she retorted, "Your presence is of no concern to me. Clarissa isn't coming because you're nothing but trouble. Understand?" "Huh? What are you talking about? Let's be clear from the start. I've never cared for you. You parade around as if you're superior just because you have a decent-looking husband and brother. From the moment we met, I've despised you. Your plain appearance doesn't match your lofty name, Clarissa. You're nothing but an obstacle to my happiness. I had sensed her coolness towards me, but I never anticipated such deep-seated hatred. Stunned, I struggled to find my voice as she glared down at me, her words cutting like ice. Didn't I make myself clear? You're nothing but trouble. There's no room here for a pregnant woman like you. So, leave. I stood speechless, but the shock didn't end there. To my astonishment, even her mother began spewing venomous words that I found hard to believe. Vivian is right. Having someone as unattractive as you at Vivian's wedding is a hassle. It's unfortunate enough for Vivian to be associated with you. Vivian turned to me, my face pale, and continued, leave now. You're just getting in the way. You're an eyesore, an ugly pregnant woman. In that moment, the anger I had been suppressing surged within me. Just as I was about to respond, my husband intervened. How dare you speak to my wife like that? I never imagined Vivian could be so disrespectful, Nathaniel exclaimed. Let's go home, Nathaniel. It's not worth it, I said. Are you sure? I don't want to stay here any longer. Let's go, I insisted, tugging my husband's arm as we made our exit from the venue. Good riddance, came the parting shot from Vivian and her mother, their insults trailing behind us. A few hours later, my brother hurried to our home, his expression weighted with regret. Clarissa, Nathaniel, I'm truly sorry for Vivian's behavior, he apologized. It's not your fault, Thomas. How did the rest of the wedding unfold? I inquired. I decided to ask the guests to leave midway through. I couldn't bear to continue the ceremony after what happened to my dear sister. That was a wise decision. But why does Vivian harbor such animosity towards me? I was taken aback when I heard what happened too, my brother responded, unsure of where he was going with this. Then, in a hushed tone, he continued, it appears Vivian has been jealous of you, Clarissa. Jealous? We've always been close as siblings. Why would that be a problem? Well, Nathaniel is quite attractive, and seeing you so happy and expecting a child seemed to bother her. Why would that be a problem? I repeated, incredulous. She was making extravagant purchases at my husband's department store because she finds him attractive. I was speechless at the absurdity of it all. Though my brother seemed concerned, he went on with the story. Vivian was upset that your pregnancy would draw more attention to you than to her on her wedding day. She couldn't bear the thought of guests coming up to you and asking questions like, how far along are you, or telling you, you look so happy. I can't believe she would react that way over such a trivial matter. It seems my brother, consumed by his work, had entrusted all the wedding planning to Vivian. Whenever he tried to offer input, he was shut down with, the bride is the focus of the day, leaving him unable to intervene. As a result, he was unaware that she had decided unilaterally to exclude me from the event. I'm deeply sorry that my decisions have hurt you, my brother said, bowing his head in apology. The following day, my mother asked us to come home, so my husband and I hurried back. When we arrived, Vivian's father was already there, his face flushed with anger, with Vivian and her mother trailing behind him. He appeared quite serious. Vivian, don't you have something to say to Clarissa? He asked sternly. When prompted by her father, Vivian clicked her tongue and fumed in protest. Why should I apologize? I was the center of attention at the wedding. When will you stop this nonsense? Her father demanded. Her mother quickly backed her up, agreeing with Vivian's outburst. Exactly. There's no reason for Vivian to apologize. It's all this woman's fault. Both Vivian and her mother openly expressed their displeasure, showing no signs of remorse. Then her father, visibly trembling, found his voice. Who do you think you're speaking to? How dare you utter such words to these individuals, he exclaimed, his tone filled with outrage. With that, he bowed deeply before us. I am profoundly sorry for the despicable actions of my daughter and wife. Please, I implore you, find it in your hearts to forgive us for this grievous incident. Despite his earnest pleas, forgiveness was not something I could offer easily. I spoke plainly, do you truly expect us to forgive you? We were unable to attend our dear brother's wedding after enduring such mistreatment. How can we possibly forgive you? But if you don't forgive us, it will cause significant trouble for our company, Vivian's father interjected, revealing his true motives behind the apology. Vivian's father owns a wholesale company that deals in imported goods and maintains a business relationship with my brother's company. However, my brother was incensed by the recent events and requested that his employer cut ties with Vivian's father's business. This is why her father is now pleading for my forgiveness, hoping to salvage the business relationship with my brother's company. I hadn't realized just how much influence my brother's company held. Despite Vivian's status as the president's daughter, my brother appeared to hold more power in this situation. Her father continued to apologize profusely, bowing his head repeatedly, but it was clear his primary concern was safeguarding his company, which only deepened my dissatisfaction. Realizing the conversation was going nowhere, I firmly told Vivian and her family, I won't interact with you any further. If you proceed with marrying my brother, I will sever ties with him as well. Hold on. My dad is apologizing profusely. Don't you have any sympathy? Vivian shouted at me, her tone laced with anger. Sympathy? You dare bring that up? You're the one who caused this whole mess. Who should really be apologizing here? Stop allowing your father to debase himself. Your selfishness ruined my brother's happiness. You're not suitable for him. Know your place. After her tirade, I threw Vivian and her family out of my parents' house. Not long after, I heard that my brother and Vivian had called off their engagement. She protested loudly, unwilling to end things, but in the end, my brother had to involve a lawyer. He also arranged for a settlement to be paid to me. While I initially hesitated to accept it, my brother insisted, saying, it's the least I can do to apologize. So, I accepted his offer with gratitude. Vivian's family's misfortune deepened, and her father's company eventually declared bankruptcy. Losing business with my brother's company, which was a critical part of their operations, left them unable to stay afloat. They lost everything because of their actions, and in retrospect, it seems fitting given their behavior. Someone like Vivian, who could so easily hurl cruel insults, ultimately faced the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, I have given birth safely and am enjoying a happy life. My brother has recovered from the end of his engagement, and he visits me almost every day to spend time with my daughter and shower her with affection. Nathaniel, may I hold her for a bit? My brother asked. But you just had her not too long ago. Please, I'll be leaving in an hour. All right, I suppose I can let you. My husband and brother were taking turns holding our precious newborn daughter. As I listened to their heartwarming exchange, I couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth and contentment. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.